Test, test, one, two, three. Test, test, one, two, three.
Good morning, everybody. The Finance Committee will come to order, please. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Are there any citizens signed up to address the committee? There appears to be none, so we'll move on to item 3, which is approval of the minutes from the August 22nd meeting. Entertaining a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Zimmerman, a second by Ms. Debose. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, motion passes. Item 4, CFO report. Ms. Clark.
Good morning. So this morning I just want to kind of remind you that we are quickly approaching our year end of September 30th. So the finance department is really busy making sure that the books are appropriately closed. BKD will actually be out in the field in late October. They will be presenting to you the final audited financial report at our December 12th meeting. So it's a very quick turnaround for them. And we will be bringing you back preliminary year-end numbers at the October Finance Committee. The only reason that those numbers have changed in the past is because of subsequent information that we received from the state on the supplemental funding program. So DSRIP, DISH, UC, but those typically do get finalized prior to the audit. So we'll keep you posted on that information. The other year-end report that you'll be hearing either in November or December, depending on when the reporting is available and how long our agenda is our annual report from Hilltop Securities on our investments. You receive the quarterly updates via the board portal, and we'll have a representative with Hilltop actually here to spend 15 or 20 minutes giving you their annual report. Also in mid-November, we are working with both Standard & Poor's and Moody's to do our annual update for our bond ratings. Those are important meetings because we don't have much current debt outstanding. Those are done usually via phone call, and I have taken care of those for the past 4 years. So we will likely have an updated rating report by late December for those as well. So any questions on kind of the timing through the end of the year?
What our current rating is?
I don't want to get these confused. With one, it's pretty much a AA minus. We do have, or a AA, we do have an outlook rating, a negative outlook, I believe, with, I think it was with Moody's. I'm confused at the moment, but one of them did give us a negative outlook, not because of our current condition, but because of the potential large issuance of debt and what that might do to our ratios. So they're kind of on a wait and see. I believe it's fairly unusual for a rating agency to actually move you from one rating to another without a negative or a positive outlook. So they are preparing themselves for those ratios that might occur at that first debt issuance.
So when we have an opportunity to hear from them or hear from you after you talk to them about the ratio of potential debt that we may consider issuing out of the overall authorized amount and how those ratios could impact rating, I mean the difference between 200 or 300 or 150 and how that might impact rating.
Yes, we will be discussing that on my call with them. They are not likely to give me a black and white answer because debt is just one of hundreds of factors that they actually consider as they lock down that rating. Now, both of those agencies about 2 years ago have come up with much more of an objective rating system. It's kind of points assigned for that final rating. It was a little bit more subjective before that. So if I recall the language, and those last two rating reports are on the portal, I believe still for you guys, but I can re-email them, both the Moody's and the S&P. It's only about a 3-page report, but it does note that there's the potential master facility construction plan that might come on board, and that the concern with the negative outlook is what that's going to do both to cash and to the debt ratios.
And that discussion's been going on for 10 years.
It has.
That discussion's been with us for a long time.
And-
Is it gonna be David Mednich on that call, or who's gonna be on that call?
Hilltop usually does join me on the call. David is not usually there. It's usually Laura Alexander and
okay.
Chris Janning.
Okay.
They're a little bit more hands-on with the rating agencies themselves.
I mean, from my perspective, Mr. Chairman, if we can get as much information as we can from our FAs relative to what these tranches of bond authorization look like going forward, if
Yes.
there's gonna be if there's a significant breakover point at a particular level of authorization, then that's something that could be important for us to know, because we're gonna be carrying this for a long, long time. And we're probably not gonna issue all of it for a long, long time. So kind of understanding what the FAA says about how those are gonna be, how those get approved, it would be, I think, helpful to us, because we're gonna live with a lot of interest for a while.
Right. And I do pick up the phone and call Hilltop frequently, especially as we start to talk about the size and the timing. There's a lot of logistics as we prepare for an issue. We have to do reimbursement resolution here at the Board of Manager level to be able to go back and pull in monies that we may have already spent from the time of the resolution forward. There is a certain amount of time from the issuance of the debt to the expenditure of that before we have to start paying arbitrage on those funds. So, you've got to get those projects really defined. You've got to get the cash flow assigned as best you can, and then try to time that just right.
Well, we may capitalize interest for a while. There's a lot of things that we may do. I think what becomes important to the bond rating agencies are they need to understand the amount of work that is going to understanding that financial impact on the district from the board standpoint and from the commissioner's standpoint, because all the things we're doing relative to, what is going to be the operational impact of releasing that capital and being able to mitigate that in a manner that doesn't put us in a negative financial situation. I mean, those are important disclosures in my mind.
Yes.
Because them just hearing, okay, well, JPS may be issuing $200 million worth of debt in 2020, that's a whole different ballgame than saying, here's the work that's going into understanding the operating impact of that debt and the committees and the work that's being done to make sure that that's being mitigated, because hopefully that will give them a little better impression that this is not just about going out there and issuing debt. This is also about understanding its impact and its operating implications for the district. So it's an important call, probably the most important call we've had in the last decade, I'm guessing.
They're all important. We've had, like I said, we've done this for the last three years. This will be my 4th. And all 4 calls have involved the conversation about the master facility plan. The $800 million worth of debt has been out there since I arrived. And so we have consistently had these calls. And in between calls, I just had an update call with one of the agencies last month who just wanted to know, where are you at this year? Where are we at with your bond issue? I had to explain to him, we're really in the early stages of the planning. So all of that communication continues to give them a comfort level on our current rating.
Okay.
So,
Great.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Trent.
okay. If there aren't any more questions, and I will have those 2 reports posted for you on the portal if you want to go in and look at those by end of day tomorrow.
Okay.
I think we can probably get it done today.
Great.
So I'm going to present August to you. We had a really strong inpatient admission and patient days month. We're looking at about 5% above our budget. You can see that we were a little bit lower than July, but still an incredibly busy month. From an outpatient standpoint, our emergency room,
There you go.
if you can focus on that, that is a 3-year high for the emergency department visits in August. They averaged about 340 patients a day. If you look at year-to-date, we were about 323 a day. So, you know, I don't think that those new treatment rooms can come on quickly enough. So, very busy. Our urgent care is down. It's about the same as it was last month. You can see that back in April, we started to kind of have a process change and patients who were directed to urgent care versus the ED based on their triage. Our primary care clinic visits, even though they show to be under budget, I do want to point out that they are much higher than last month, about 7%. We do the budget as best we can. We look at a 3-year annual trend and try to push up and down, but we had a really high budget month. You can see that tan bar in the center was one of the higher months last year, but very strong primary care visit month.
Sharon, and sorry to interrupt you, we talked about this the other day. Is there a relationship between the emergency department visits and the urgent care visits? One being up and one being down? Is there an access issue?
There is. It's not necessarily an access issue. There are several things that are going on with psychiatric, mental health care, as well as some of the patients who require a higher level of evaluation with a CT or an MRI. Some of those patients, I believe, traditionally had been seen in urgent care, and we, about midway through the year,
That's right,
moved those back
steering them towards the ER or
the
ED.
emergency department. So there is a definite correlation there to some extent. Now, what you don't have necessarily are the relevance of the numbers. The urgent care decrease does not account for all of the increase in the emergency department. You know, they're not on the same scale. So, you know, we see about 4,000 in the urgent care. You're seeing over 10,500 in the ED. So there's still some growth in the
Yeah.
ED even based on that change.
Okay, thank you.
Some of our other areas, invasive lab on the top right continues to be strong throughout the year. They're 3% over for this month, and for the 11 months, they are about 5.2% over. Our inpatient surgeries are very strong. You can see where they have trended from last year. This year, they're also very high. We've gotten them to 582 inpatient surgeries this month, which is about 26% higher than we expected them to be. Our outpatient surgeries are not quite where we expected them to be for the month, but trending year to date, they have been over budget as well.
Is that September historically a low month for outpatient surgeries? Because we even budgeted that it would be lower.
Well, you can see, it's not historically. August, 2 years ago was very high with the gray bar. The tan bar in the center is last year, and so this year's performance is lower. It's lower than last month, and it's also lower than the prior years.
But we budgeted for it to be lower.
We did. We budgeted it to trend out. So it's kind of a shot in the dark trend on a lot of, inpatient seems to be a little bit heavier in the winter months, but when you start to look at clinic visits, it could be impacted by a physician taking a vacation or maternity leave. And it could just be, one high volume surgeon that could impact that each
Yeah.
month.
Okay.
So for mental health, our psych inpatient days were about 4% higher than budget and on trend from last month. Our clinic visits continue to be much higher than our budgeted number. Again, that comes from also a protocol change where we started to make sure that upon discharge or evaluation that patients actually had a clinic appointment. So that drove some of that volume back into the clinic. The PEC, you can see, has kind of leveled off in August and is just under where we had expected them to be for budget. Some of our financial metrics, our days cash on hand, if you'll look at it, we always have this natural trend. We receive some of our tax dollars at the first of the calendar year. So this month we have ended our cash on hand, which is available for operations. It excludes the JPS fund, future fund, as well as the restricted dollars. So this shows us what I have available for operations is about 185 days. Last year we were at 181 for the same time period. So very close in maintaining that cash balance. The total days cash on hand here, this is actually a calculation that S&P would use. So if you wanted to go out and look, it includes the future fund, since it's only board designated and not truly restricted. So we have a higher number, about 235, and that is the S&P calculation. Our net AR days, I did want to point this out today. This is a big move. We are at the lowest point in 3 years in our days in AR. It is down to 45 days. You know, when we were in the 50s, we were good as an industry standard, and as we start to get it down into the lower 40s, there's been a lot of work. That is a big move, just to decrease it by a couple of days. So
That's a great number, even if we were talking about a private
Yeah.
hospital.
it
I
is.
mean, that's a comparable number with the charitable hospitals and the private hospitals.
Yeah, I wish my customers paid that quickly, yeah. And I did add, Sharon and I talked about this the other day, maybe in a future finance committee, we're gonna do a presentation on a new rev cycle steps. I think there's some real innovation there that
Awesome.
we need to know
That'd be
about.
Yeah, I think as we get ready for year end, there's a lot of success stories. We talked a little bit about it during the budget process, but we were able to realize close to $5 million this year from increased collections and just being more efficient from the very front at registration all the way through the back and contracting as well. We budgeted another $5 million on top of the current trend for the budget. So Rory and I will work on getting a PowerPoint ready for you today and to kind of show you where some of those successes have come from. And we'll sing some praises for rev cycle.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Good number.
It's good. You know, I've always said I will never apologize for collecting an account for services that we perform that has a payer source. And that's exactly what we're doing in some of these rev cycle improvements.
It's gone back to Charlie Powell when he shared this, to your work, to DT Wins and Karen Van Wagner's. And it was our effort to try to get there, and now you all are seeing the ramifications of an incredible amount of hard work. Sharon's also brought new team members in with Laura Thomas and Rory McCready, who have brought some huge benefit to us in practice. And not only is that phenomenal to get it down into the 40s, but you're dealing with a challenging patient base. These are folks that sometimes, as Amanda knows, checks and balances and checkbook accruals are tough for a population that's not used to dealing with a financial structure. So I think that the team's done really well, so I appreciate Sharon, but I also want to make sure that I let y'all know that we appreciate y'all, because you didn't go unlistened, as we constantly for the past 5 years have tried to get to these kind of points.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
There's our payer mix. It doesn't change a whole lot from month to month.
Sharon, your FTEs crept up more than normal. Is there a specific reason for that?
So our FTEs, the calculation is always done on volume, right? So there's a volume factor in there, and I think the important thing to see is that we are working at 5.53 compared to a budget of 5.72. So when we staff like an inpatient floor, when we do our fixed budget, we assume that there's going to be an average daily census on a floor of 18. For an example, well, we might have 15, we might have 20. We give them credit for a worked hour per patient day. And so our budgets are built kind of from the ground up. They're not guaranteed to be able to staff to 18. What we have to do is flex staff every day. And, you know, when you combine the flexing of staff, and it's not perfect, but hopefully if you look at it on a 2-week spread or a 4-week spread or an 11-month spread, the law of averages will continue to work out if you're correctly working on your labor productivity. So as you look at the adjusted patient day of this calculation, which is the denominator, that changes with our actual volume. So we kind of push together inpatient volume and outpatient volume, and then we come up with an adjustment factor for our FTEs that were paid. So this is total paid.
Your patient days, though, pretty much stayed the same.
Well, they're 5% higher this month. I think patient days are actually 8% higher. Admissions were 5% higher.
That means that the number would theoretically be less. I mean, the resulting
Well, no, we would staff
FTE.
up. We would staff up for each
Relative
patient
to volume,
day
though, right?
relative to the volume,
And
yes.
hopefully not over that.
No, we always try to staff to volume. So,
It's a bigger chunk than we've been seeing.
okay. We still look good from a budget expectation, and again, when we look at FTEs per adjusted patient day, this graph here is our year-to-date. When I look at the month, we also look at it from a monthly basis as well.
That FT number is year-to-date?
Oh, no, this is actual, I'm sorry. So the 5.53 is an 11-month look. This would be our actual FTEs at the end.
Oh, okay.
Of the month.
So your last column is what you expected it to be.
Yes, this
Okay,
is
I'm sorry.
budget.
I'm sorry, I
Yes.
misread that.
Oh, you thought that was a
Yeah,
trend.
I thought that was, I
I'm
thought that's where
sorry.
you were now.
No, we're at 5.53. So this is, I'll try to write, this is
Oh,
a
that's better news.
favorable variance, yes.
Okay, good
So,
news.
yes,
Good news.
and this is prior year. So we were at 5.58. We are actually less than we were last
Yeah.
year.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Now it makes sense.
Okay.
Just be able to read would be nice.
Should have spent a little more time on that, sorry. Here's our connection enrollment. We continue to grow. We are almost at the 42,500 mark. We added about 350 enrollees during the month. For August, we had actually a little bit less favorable month, and the story for this month is simply our payer mix. we had a higher percentage of overall revenue as self-pay or connection patients. And it does not take much of a monthly shift to see a negative impact. And so the negative impact was almost $1 million of what we expect to collect for business that we saw during the month of August. If you remember, for about the last 3 months, I've told you we were having a positive payer mix. And every month that is going to vary from our fixed budget, whether it's higher or lower. So for a 1 month, that's not a big concern for me. We have continued to be about $2.4 million ahead of budget for the year. So that will fluctuate, although it was a really large fluctuation. And it was not pinpointed to a specific event. It did occur mainly in our inpatient area, which are some of our higher dollar claims and reimbursement. The other impact that we had is that, most of these variances, so some of this operating revenue, some of the supply overage, as well as this overage and other operating expenses continues to be for our 340B retail program. But when you net all of that together, that created about an $800,000 impact to our bottom line. So when you account for the new program, which was underestimated from a volume standpoint, as well as the negative payer mix, that kind of explains why we came in behind budget, but not the full $1 million. Year to date, we continue to have a very strong performance. We're about $17.5 million ahead of an operational performance than we expected to be for the 11 months. And I do suspect that we will have a positive pickup during our year-end close process as well. For September, yes. Are there any other questions for August? I'm going to skip on to a claim. A claim shows to have a negative encounters, as you can see, by about 3%. Their expectation was that some of their positions would be filled and there would be more overall visits. When I flip the page and talk to you about what happened financially, they actually came in right on budget, and that's because they're getting a higher dollar per visit in revenue. Surgery has been very strong, trauma has been very strong, and there was one other one, pediatrics. So surgery and trauma are going to be some really large visits. So from a revenue standpoint, a claim has turned out to be fine for the month. Also, they just almost hit budget. They were about $147,000 behind their budget this month. So that is, again, timing. They're still $3.1 million ahead of budget at $18.4 million for the year.
So is it fair, Sharon, to say then, to conclude that their numbers benefit from volume, exclusive of payer mix impact? So we don't necessarily get that same benefit. We see a fluctuation in payer mix like we've seen this month, and it's going to affect our net revenues. That same volume metric, when applied to a claim, doesn't produce a negative revenue implication because of payer mix. Is that right?
It is not as big of a deficit. So if you think about the payer mix chart, a claim for the most part receives payment for self-pay and for the connection program from the medical center.
Right.
So their self-pay is really kind of guaranteed more at a Medicare level.
They don't have the same
They
risk
do
factor.
not
But our
have
self-pay
the
is
same
not
gap that's
guaranteed, right.
produced. So when we have a really high self-pay mix, then our purchase services for claims paid are also high,
Yeah.
going to a claim, which is about half, and then to other providers as well.
Yeah.
So we
I
take
think
a
the
hit
answer
in
is
net
yes to your
revenue.
question.
That's a really good tie back. So that's a difficult concept for a lot of people to grasp. But we do have, we pay for both the professional claims as well as take a hit on our gross on the medical center side. Then from a physician side, we pretty much maintain at least a Medicare
They get
level.
paid regardless of the payer type.
They do.
That's
Yes.
the simplest form is, no matter who shows up, they're gonna get paid. We don't necessarily
don't,
benefit from
right.
that.
That's
That's
right, and there's a mix in that clinic, obviously, so it's not just the pure gain of it and the expenses and the cost that you have. Then the challenge that we constantly have is the facility fee that you have to, well, you don't have to put it in place, but the challenge is we have a facility fee. You take that away, it has significant impact to us, but at the same time, it discourages commercial payers for coming in. So it is the constant conundrum by which JPS lives in, and we live in that from a volume standpoint, and we live in that in the standpoint to enhance a payer mix.
And that is a critical thing you just said, because as we look forward to trying to balance the revenues necessary to support the new debt, facility fees and some of the things that discourage commercial traffic are some of the things that we've got to be in a position to look pretty hard at. And looking at what ultimately services we provide that, to use the C word, they compete.
Yes.
So if we're gonna really be serious about diversifying revenue streams and creating new opportunities to bring in money to pay for the debt we're about to issue, those two things are pretty crucial factors.
Yeah.
And I definitely think staff and board should have the fairness of debating those.
Yeah.
It's not to suggest that staff has an opinion one way or the other, but staff should be providing the board with empirical data so that the board can ultimately decide the direction at which we go on some of those crucial issues. Because your point's taken.
It's a big policy issue.
I've talked about it
really
till I'm literally blue in the face to y'all, and y'all are probably tired of hearing it, but status quo for JPS won't work when it comes to debt
No,
retirement.
it won't.
And so it's not, we don't have to be draconian, we have to be smart. And we have to be smart about what we do, and we can't be lulled into, let's just keep doing everything we're currently doing, because we won't be able to expand our mission, and we won't be able to make a payment on a building. So I think it's incumbent upon staff to begin to push those ideas in front of you, but not suggest that those are staff's directions and this is the way you gotta go. Because we constantly get criticized, well, staff just brought us these ideas, what part did we play?
Right.
You play a critical role, because staff's role is to get all the ideas in front of you and you say, we like A, but we don't like B. It's not ours to say exactly, you gotta go this direction.
Well, part of this is discretionary and part of it's not. I mean, to some extent, we don't have ultimate discretion over our line of services relative to being able to compete. We do have a higher level of discretion when it comes to facility fee planning.
Sure.
And as we look at commercial payer impact on our model and understand the relationship between facility fees and that revenue stream, we may have to look closely at what our facility fee model looks like, because that could bump us up
Yeah.
in terms of net revenue.
And also retaining or captivating those patients that have a Medicaid or a Medicare or government
Absolutely.
support services that are finding a real challenge in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Where we could say, we'll take, again, no disrespect to any of our colleagues,
Right.
but if you're getting reimbursed 60 cents on the dollar, and that's not a patient base you want, 60 cents on the dollar to JPS is a significant difference to 0 on the dollar. So we have to figure out where we go and how we do that, knowing that we have an environment in the not-for-profit and private world that we respect, and we respect our place as those that get 40% of their budget from a tax base. But at the same time, the knowledge that 40% is still 60% away from a perfect budget. So we got to make that gap up some way. And what I tell my colleagues very fairly is impact and challenge to JPS will significantly impact and challenge your facilities in a variety of ways. So we have to figure that incredible balance out.
DT?
I believe on the JPS connection, I'll come back to it, is the ones that if we focus on their cost and really look at that and make sure that on the utilization, it's the one that we really should be able to drive. That is the one that we're paying everybody for. And so I do understand needing increased streams and all of that, but I think if you control that first, that's a good point to start, because that is the main one that we should be looking at. And that's one of the reasons I keep coming back, and I think next month we'll be getting some of those cost data. Is that when you plan on?
Well, I think
Bring
what
it.
we had talked about during the budget presentation is once the software schedule is set, we'll be bringing back a calendar of critical dates and milestones.
I don't know if that's what my understanding of it was, but if those critical dates and milestones is saying, here's when I'm gonna start getting some of that data. Because I don't think we can do a lot on controlling our costs and looking at our destiny until you are really able to understand everything. When you talk to me about we need to change services, if we don't have that, I don't think you can do it.
Dorothy, your point is not a necessary situation that you've kept saying it because we believe in that too. If you've got 43,000 people that you're providing services to, you have a controlled audience by which you can get immeasurable amount of information from a utilization standpoint in services provided. So I think staff-wise, we're very much not only hearing that, I agree with you 100%. That's an audience that we've got to figure out how we best provide services, what kind of services we are providing, and I think that's the future of JPS. And it hasn't necessarily been the past of JPS, but it will definitely be the future of
I
JPS.
think when we look at the ER and all the visits and everything that's going over there, I don't know how many of those are JPS connection. How many of those are our frequent flyers? That is the good information. If we're gonna address costs, we have to have it.
Totally agree.
This is what I'm looking for, because, you know, when I look at this one, right, there's many ways to defend this, but I can't, because I don't know what's the cost of pharmacy, what's the cost of post-acute care. I don't understand what's the cost of home health. And then, you know, then at the end of the day, you're gonna be looking at what's the discrepancy between best practice and what's actually being provided to the patient. And then we can just follow where the quality goes, right? When we don't compete in the next wave of remaking the organization, patient will come to us, healthy patient will come to us as they see our result. So I want to get rid of all that competition. It is how we manage the life of the patient, you know, general life and all that stuff. What's the potential cost avoidance and all that stuff? It is very, very hard when I look at this, and I can't say a physician, I know they're doing a great job. I can't say they're doing a great job because they defer this. They intervene at the appropriate time when they send to the specialist and all that stuff. Those are what we were looking for our population, and I can't see that from the financial.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to get to a point where I think in the past, we've always been a board that's pretty much said, look, the numbers are the numbers, and we kind of deal with the numbers. You know, the commissioners' meeting last week was illuminating to me in terms of what they see going forward and their expectations, particularly as it relates to cost, and that was reiterated a couple of times. I want to make sure that we have, as a board, have really sort of encouraged and challenged the staff with help us drill down into these numbers so that we can understand what policy changes could be implemented that helps help move those numbers toward us and helps change that dial. And I think there's not been a real need in the past maybe to do that based on our costs, but I think there's going to be a critical need going forward because I think some of the expectations of our capital relative to the cost of operating that capital are still a major issue for JPS. I think every time we get the opportunity to drill down, we probably need to be drilling down. Yeah.
I agree.
Changes
change completely.
Okay, we'll begin working on that. Did you have a question? Sure.
I'm gonna start working on that, and your software data, when do you think that you will first start being able to deliver a report?
So if you're looking for volumes of connection patients or specific to just hospital costs, we can start to prepare a presentation from that information. When you start looking more into the population health side and outcomes data, that's what the software that we approved during the budget will start to report on.
I kind of first would like to see your inpatient data, that cost data, because based on what that is, when you start looking at population, then you're looking at early screening, what are we doing there? So I think we have to have a cost of what we're paying out now, and then we can move into the population.
We do have the cost information now, especially for inpatient. We're still working on how to bring the pharmacy information over, as we had discussed.
Okay.
The physician information and the physician network is phase 2 of cost accounting. So a claim is not fully costed at the moment.
But
do
we are
have
paying
the
them a
claim
cost.
information that we pay to a claim from the medical center side. So
So-
there are components that I can begin working with and bringing cost information. I think for the first probably 3 to 6 presentations, there may be more questions than answers from some of that data, and
Right.
that's okay. So, yeah, we'll begin working on that.
So I just want to have a date. I mean, we keep saying it's going to come, and I'd just like to have you to give me a time frame, your time frame, if it's 3 months, 4 months, 2 months, just give me a date, because it's coming. It's been coming ever since I've been on this. Well, that's not ever since I've been on the board, but every time we get a new system, it was coming. So I would just like for you to tell me what is your best estimate that you will first
So
start.
an estimate for thinking through it here on the spot, Dorothy, would be, I would appreciate an opportunity to get this year closed. So we're gonna be closing this year, 9/30. It takes a while to cost the data, so probably by December, we would be able to cost the data. And I would like a couple of months to be able to prepare a meaningful presentation of that costing for you.
Okay, so that'll be March.
So that would be March.
Okay, all right. I
Yes,
just wanted
ma'am.
the date. And I know that we don't normally have that stuff in our minutes, but I'd like to have that, some of our milestones, this date somewhere, because I think it's important. We must start, and so I
I will
think
make
March would
sure
be.
that we
Okay.
will have costing information for the connection patients in the draft of the minutes that you will see from this
You might
meeting.
want to do a connection, and I know self-pay is going to be somewhere in there.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Let me ask a question. When you said costing, is that costing is the general area, or is that going to be something that is kind of specific for us to look at? Because I'm very concerned about is getting the data, and then we come back and say, oh, we didn't attribute it correctly to the right primary care or to the right specialist, and stuff like that.
So you are probably the next expert at costing other than my staff on the board. And we have costed the entire medical center expenses across on a per patient level. It's fairly detailed. It's not, it is
But do they-
based on which physician and which floor or
Right, but-
which clinic.
But do they know down to the level where sometimes you can have two primary, kind of look like two primary care, but they're not really primary care? And
So
they
what
may-
we will have
And then-
is just dollars paid out of medical services reimbursement at the patient level. So we'll have dollars. When you start talking about outcomes and what levels they're actually seen at, I think that's a much deeper dive.
Right, because I was trying to make it a dual use of that data also as well, right? Because you can apply that backwards so that you can challenge the insurance company as you move toward value-based type thing. Because the attribution, and then when they go to a specialist, when they get a second opinion and all that stuff, if it doesn't get it correctly, you can't grab that revenue back into your bucket. It will go somewhere else. And that will be potential revenue leakage and all that stuff. That's why I want to make sure that as we go down that path, let's do it one time and lay out the pipe correctly so that you can get to that information. Otherwise, it'll be too late to be looking at that. And also all the way down to the gaming of the post-acute care and home health.
All the way down
also.
to the what?
The post-acute care and home health also as well, because
Okay.
you got to be able to look at the primary care physician and then the certification of the home health so that you can stop the low yield care. Let's put it that way, because I don't want to raise the word fraud, abuse, and all that stuff, because you will never get anybody to participate and collaborate with you. But as you approach high yield care and low yield care, then you can start recognizing the patterns and start putting some
So
pressure on
again,
them.
for the first round, I will be able to bring you costing. So if it got paid out of the medical center, which home health does, or a SNF gets paid out as a purchase service, or any kind of outside medical service, that is included in the costing of the medical center. As you start to look at how effective those costs are, that's going to be in the second wave when we start to look at outcome data.
So we will be able to see sniff and swing back and all that stuff? if we
I
need to?
don't know the answer to that because we haven't gotten the software in place. But I know Dr. Hochberg is leading that, and I'll work with him. And again, I think that, you know, for the first 3 or 4 times we talk about this, it's going to create more questions than answers, and that's okay. So we'll just have to drill down. It's not gonna be the full picture as you described it just now. The first pass will not.
Right. I'm just raising questions so that, make sure that, so that as you coordinate with IT, the data aggregation is so important, right?
Yes.
Because when they slip through that, you guys can only see things that are already there, and it may not be correct at all.
So with the new software, the cost accounting data that we have will actually be uploaded into that to marry it out with the outcomes. So I don't know if that helps or not. Okay.
So I have a question, just a context type of question. And the transition of the new software, were you doing this kind of reporting before with the old software?
No, there's not really any old software. So we've just developed the cost accounting system, and we're still working on allocation of total expenses down to the patient level. It's a complex process that you have to go through to do that. The newer software that we were talking about during the budget process would actually help manage the care of the connection population and determine outcomes based on preventative care, the effectiveness of cost, where they're receiving care, did they get the right care at the right place at the right time, maybe overutilization of specialists that maybe could be done at a primary care setting. So all of those other utilization factors will be easier to look at using the second, what I'm calling the second phase. The first phase is truly an accounting of the costs that have been, you know, some of these costs that have been expended, this 913 million plus the additional month's worth of activity.
Thank you. And how long have we been using this new software?
The cost accounting was purchased about 2 years ago, and we've been stepping it down ever since. And I do believe that we have great costing information. We've been using it internally for about the last probably 8 to 9 months, where we can start to make some decisions on where are some of the costs that are higher. Benchmarking is always good and bad. It takes a long time to make it through why we might be different or why we might not be different. So we've been able to pull certain information out of that for quite a while.
So is there any reporting that you feel comfortable in sharing from that internal data?
I believe that's what we are talking about, that will be coming back to you in March.
Okay. Okay. So nothing immediate?
No, I would
Gotcha.
like to be able to close our year and then work through and make sure everything is costed out, and then we can spend a couple of months getting that PowerPoint ready for you. All right?
If it would help, when you start pulling that together, I'll be glad to come in so you can get my questions.
Yeah.
Sometimes they help you do the report.
Okay.
So you can see some of those things as you're doing it. I'll be glad, and I'll volunteer to teach.
Well, I don't, I will bounce that off of some folks, but I don't know, based on the new information that we got a couple of months ago, I don't know if a bigger group discussion is better, and that's why I'm saying, I think now that we don't meet with you guys individually as much, that my expectation is going to be the first time is more of a discussion, and then we'll bring it back again, and the group can have a further discussion, and we'll bring it back again.
I may be out of school here, but I don't think this is a function of finance and waiting for the finance department to produce. I think this is a function that should be led by community or by the physician group with the data available, and then come back and tie that with financial as needed. Because-
And if I've misspoken, the costing information is definitely an accounting function, and that's what my part is. We have costed the patient information. The costing information will be uploaded to
But your costing is tied to your Epic system, if I'm not mistaken. That's not where it started. The costing tied to the Epic system.
Yes, Epic captures all of our patient
But
data.
you should follow the data coming from the insurance company, because that's where all your total revenue coming from.
So we do balance back. Part of Epic is our billing system.
You don't
and
see the whole 360 view of the patient. You don't have that information coming from because unless
There are more feeds
unless this is a
from,
closed system like a Kaiser Permanente or something, you don't. You just can't.
We do have a couple other systems, and I don't mean to talk over Sharon, but we have, as she was talking, we have several.
David, come on up to the podium so that anybody live streaming can hear your words of wisdom.
Yeah, so there are several other systems that we've been pulling data from for what Sharon's talking about with the new software, and it's not just from Epic, right? Because there is claims data that goes in and out from our payers, and there are claims data that comes in that handles just for the connections patients for the dollars that are going in and out of a claim for those patients.
Right.
So when she's talking about, the complexity of this, it's not one feed, and it's not just Epic that is doing it. From Sharon's perspective, we couldn't have this conversation 8 years ago because we didn't have a cost accounting system to even know where our costs were going. And it's just been within the last 2-3 years underneath her leadership that we've been able to say, okay, now we understand, right? And now we know where all the costs are going and all the finances are going, and we've been able to really straighten all that out. Now we can use that data in alliance with the Epic data, as well as all the claims data that's coming in and out of us. Now we can marry all that to be able to drill down to the data that you're seeing. And previously, and I'm just speaking that something Robert's probably going to fire me for, but previous to that, we just didn't really have that leadership to know all of that and where all the ins and outs were. And when we tried similar systems like Crimson and so on and so forth 7 years ago, that we just did not have the thought process down, let alone the data aggregation levels to be able to say, this is what the board needs, this is the financial leadership to be able to get there. Now we're at a point that we have all of those things in place, so now we can actually make some sense out of the data. So if that makes sense. But yeah, there are multiple feeds, and it's the claims data that's going to be coming to us from those outside providers that we're really going to be doing, so we can understand what our costs are internally as well as the outside that are going to be required from us. There's still some speculation.
I'll disagree.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. Because I think you're digging something too deep that you won't be able to get your answer.
Okay.
It's the cost accounting and all that stuff is to be used to take the false positive out, but you should take it from the attribution coming from the insurance company. And from there, because everybody's looking at it from internally, and they all failed miserably. Other health system did. You need to take it from, that's why a lot of people goes in from the claims system of the insurance company, because you got everything that you really need, because otherwise they don't pay, right? You have to justify all that stuff, the coordination, all that stuff.
Right.
You bring that in, and then you tie that with your lab system, your EMR, and all that stuff, and some the other stuff to bring it. But that's when you get crossover with the case management system and the care management system, where we're looking for the financial impact and all that stuff, but doesn't have to go down that path that we don't have to wait that long for. That's what I'm.
Right. So I agree with what you're saying on that. So I think probably what Sharon and I and Sharon and Dr. Hochberg have been spearheading this with myself. So I think probably what we'll do is we'll look at the schema of where all these fees are coming in. And when she does her presentation about where these costs are, I think we need to overlay that with where the data is coming from, where we're pulling it from, how we're trying to do the aggregation and attribution of those claims. And like Sharon said, I think it was very well put. That's a starting point, and then as you guys start drilling through your questions, then we'll start figuring out where some of these other things go, and use some of the expertise that's already on the board with everyone here to figure out what's the dollars that we're trying to really get to, and I think that's where we can partner up and make that work.
Okay. So last point I wanted to make is just that, again, way over here on the total column on the right, you can see that our income from operations on a consolidated basis is about $6.5 million compared to a loss position that we really thought we would be in during that budget process of close to $14 million. So it's been a strong financial year compared to our budget. And if you recall, our budget 2020 puts us in a really good place for next year as well. So that was all of my prepared comments for the financials, unless someone else has some questions.
Any questions for Sharon on the
Okay.
August? I'll entertain a motion to accept her report. Motion by Dr. Weber, seconded by Mr. Nguyen. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Clark. Ms. Walker, item 5B. Morning, Pia.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thank you all for allowing for me to present to you all this morning the contract on B. Smith Services. This morning, I would like to ask for your approval for this contract. The total cost is $793,000, which is in our approved budget. The total estimated amount will be 1.5. This contract is for when we do interim leadership as well as executive leadership. And we did also post this as an RFP for other agencies for this type of service. So at this time, I would like to ask for your approval of this contract with B.E. Smith.
So Pia, I had just a couple of real simple questions, and I didn't bring my book with me, I'm sorry. So for the 793, is that a certain number of searches we think are going to occur, or just based on historical?
Certain number that we
sort of?
possibly estimate. So, of course, you know, when you're recruiting for leadership and executive level roles, it's going to be at a higher cost.
Sure.
What occurs is that anytime when we place for interim is not paid until the person is placed. When it's for executive leadership, what occurs with that, usually what you find out in the industry is that usually it's a 3-payment process that occurs. They do ask for an upfront fee because that's the cost of their
Of going and
recruitment,
doing it, right.
advertisement, and of course, the second payment is usually for them just their work and their process in helping to get the person placed. And we do not pay the final payment until the actual individual is
Right,
placed into
okay.
the role.
And is it a percentage typically of the salary?
Of
or
the
is it-
salary,
okay.
it's a percentage typically
And
of the person's
historical,
salary.
just our experience has been, that's about 800,000 a
Okay.
year is what.
It could be less, but based upon what we paid previously, that's what we base the number on.
Okay.
So for the upcoming year, it could be lesser than that based upon our return and then the attrition that we occur in the organization as well.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay. And this is not physicians, this is executive
This
leadership?
is
or-
leadership, this is our roles that consist of director and above, and then for executive, VP and above too
But
as
how
well.
many of those a year would you say there are just overall within that
Oh, wow, guesstimation,
rough order of magnitude?
I could say it could probably be about 10, 15
Okay,
at minimum, yeah.
okay.
Because some of our positions, we place successfully on our own, with our own talent management team, and then there could be a possibility of the harder to recruit roles that we do work with B.E. Smith. So we do go through a process of identifying and allowing for our own talent management team to work the
Right,
process.
so this is not exclusive, we can use
Right.
them or others
Right, we
depending
can
on the
use
source.
this, or we can use our own talent management services too, as well.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Is there any warranty, guarantee from them?
Say that
Is
again,
there
I'm
any
sorry.
guarantee from them for
Yes, so
successful
on what we,
candidate or the
what we did
replaces?
with B.E. Smith is that the guarantee with this is that if the person does not stay in the job for a year, what they do, they give us a reduced cost if we have to recruit for that job within a year again. And so it could be 50% of the cost that they guarantee for us. But B.E. Smith is a year. Some agencies is 6 months, so it all depends upon what is in that clause for recruitment services. So it varies per agency.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Does that preclude them from recruiting the people they place if several years out and then they take that same person somewhere else?
You
Do
know,
you
I
have
have
anything
never
to
had
protect
that to occur
I've seen it
in my
before.
history, but those, I mean, what occurs is that anytime when we go through these, we do look at previous individuals that have sat in the role so that we're not bringing them back in, or if it wasn't a good hire for the organization as well. So we do have our parameters that we look at when we're working with the agencies to do this placement.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Amanda, you had a question?
I do, I have a couple of questions, some just educational and context questions for these types of contracts. In looking at their leadership team and their executive leadership team, it doesn't seem that they're very inclusive. So what is their ratio of minority applicants to minority hiring? Is that something that is looked at when you receive the RFP? Is that a question that's on that RFP?
For the applicants?
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, we recruit for the best qualified applicant for the positions. Looking at us as an organization, since we do focus on diversity, that is something that, you know, if we need to focus on diversity recruitment for a job, that is something that we have to coach the agency on as well. So those transparent conversations, if that needs to occur, it can occur. And so we have absolutely no issue with B.E. Smith because we have made that relationship with them if we need to focus on doing that for recruitment for those jobs. So that can occur, and if it needs to occur, we do have that conversation with them.
And what is, oh, sorry.
I was gonna ask you a question, Amanda, because that may be a policy issue that we have not ever delved into.
Yeah.
And that is, it may be a policy issue we've never discussed. We have our own internal MWBE policies that we have to adhere to, and our bidders and our proposals and all have to fill out the forms to tell us whether or not they comply with our internal policies. If I'm understanding you correctly, what you're saying is, have we taken that policy forward to say, one of the criteria that we want to see in the firms that are going out there and trying to, you know, locate folks for us to come work here is the diversity component among their pool of applicants? And are they giving us pools of applicants that reflect the kind of
Correct.
diversity that internally we're seeking to get. Is that right?
Correct.
Because that's a great idea, frankly. I mean, that's something I've never even contemplated whether or not we've done that, but that's an interesting
Yeah.
thought. And,
Yeah, and that was just the context, and now I know that, I didn't know if there was a previous relationship with this particular company.
Previous
or
relationship,
what?
we've had an
Okay.
ongoing relationship. So I've been with the organization for the last 7 years, and I know that we've had this for the last 6 years with B.E. Smith, yes.
Yeah, it's just within, and I guess this is more towards HR than anything else. In looking at those particular practices, we know that the number of applicants that come in for minorities aren't always the ones that get to the recruiter at the final stages with the company. So if that is something that is within the RFP, something that we can look at later on as we move forward with other contracts.
Absolutely.
Then I think that that's
Yeah.
something that we need to be able to place in.
That makes sense.
For Ms. Walker. I'll entertain a motion for approval of item B, 5B.
Thank you.
Motion by Ms. Debose, second by Dr. Schrader. Wow, Chet has spoken. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Pia. Dr. Duncan, item C.
Good morning. So I
Good
come
morning.
before you today to ask your approval for the purchase of Savvy Scout, which is a wire-free radar localization system that allows our surgeons to precisely locate and target tissue in the breast for removal. Although Savvy Scout is fairly new technology, it's become a standard of care for top breast programs across the country. And so as we look to improve the quality of care that we provide and our patient experience, we see this as being a win-win for us. Currently, just to review with everyone, currently if a patient is requiring a biopsy or a lumpectomy, it requires us to schedule 2 procedures on the same day in 2 different locations. The first procedure is done at our Health Center for Women, Maine in our mammography suite. It is a needle localization procedure by which the patient, a needle is placed at to locate the tissue. A portion of that needle actually remains projected from the breast. Cup is placed on it, a gown is placed on the patient, and then the patient is transported to our OR. So you can see that just the complexity of scheduling that and the ongoing discomfort until the OR procedure takes place, that there should be a better procedure for that requires a lot of complexity. What Savvy Scout allows us to do is to actually schedule that first procedure up to 30 days prior to the procedure. It is a wireless, non-radioactive implant that is placed at the point of which the tissue needs to be removed. We can then send that patient home and then schedule their surgery, and that works both for the patient, it's convenience for the patient, and for the surgeon. And it is FDA approved, and I am asking for approval of the purchase of that. Sienna Medical is the only vendor that offers this technology, and so I'm also asking sole source agreement approval.
Any questions for Dr. Duncan on this? So the motion on this does need to be 2-part, one for the sole source and one for the approval of the request. So your motion contains both components. You heard it here first.
What did you say?
I'd be happy to dance on the grave of needle localized.
Well, we're going to let you do that. Once you approve this, we're going to be closer to that.
One-legged man dance.
One-legged man dance. We'll include that in the minutes. So we have a motion. Do I hear a second? Second by Mr. Zimmerman. All in favor? No. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Ms. Baugh. Item 5D. Both of these next 2 items are actually revenue items, correct?
Correct. Good morning. I'm pleased to present you with 2 contracts The first contract is for adult and adolescent crisis services. This is a contract with MHMR of Tarrant County. They pay us to compensate for the large volume of indigent patients that come to TSP. It doesn't cover all of our expenses, but it certainly helps with those expenses that we incur. This also covers for a program that we have with MHMR of $106,000. So it's for jail inmates that have a mental health condition and can have an early release with conditions, and they're able to come to our partial hospitalization program, so it helps compensate for those expenses. And then also, MHMR reimburses us for a nurse salary that focuses strictly on the jail inmates that have a mental health issue to monitor their physical health as well as their medication compliance for their mental health needs. The total of the contract is $2.386236 million.
Okay, any questions for Zelia on this item? I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Dr. Weber, second by Ms. Debose. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Zelia. Item E.
So a second contract, again, is with MHMR of Tarrant County. So for those of you that are new on the board, we have 28 beds that we operate. It's called Trinity Springs North, and that is for patients in Tarrant County that have been committed to the state hospital, and in lieu of going to the state hospital, they go to Trinity Springs North, and our average length of stay there is about 42 to 45 days. And so that allows us to be able to keep Tarrant County residents local and to be able to engage their families for their treatment as well. This contract is, MHMR acts as a pass-through agency for the state. And so this contract is for $5.7+ million to cover our costs regarding the operations of those 28 beds. This does not cover all of our costs, but it certainly makes a significant dent in our costs, and it provides a much-needed service for Tarrant County residents.
Okay, any questions for Zelia on this? We have a motion by Mr. Bose, second by Ms. Arizola. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you,
Zelia.
everybody.
Any report from council?
We had, for the month of August, we had 48 contracts that were negotiated under 500,000.
48?
And those are in the portal.
Any questions for council on any of that? We have no items enclosed, therefore we are adjourned.
Okay, gang, we're gonna get started, okay? Good morning, everyone. We're gonna go ahead and call the Joint Board of Managers and Human Resource Committee meeting to order. We do not have anyone signed up to speak, right? No. Okay, thank you. So our next item on the agenda is our minutes. You've had an opportunity to review those. Are there any corrections? Move to approve. All right. Move to approve by Dr. P, second by DT. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All noes by nay, okay? We're going to move right into our agenda, and the next I have up is for Mr. Whitman to do the update on the annual incentive.
I think Mr. Sullivan's name's on there too.
Oh, okay, yes, Steve, I'm sorry. Had to get you.
So, we're kind of between two time frames here. Usually, we have brought the year-to-date performance results to you before now. And in keeping with our traditional trajectory, we brought a discussion of goals to you later. So we are where we are in September, almost the end of the fiscal year, but we want to update you today on where the annual incentive performance levels are trending, where the long-term incentive plan levels are trending. And then after that presentation from Mr. Sullivan, who we've engaged to do that, we will then talk about the proposed goals for 2020 for both LTIP and annual incentive plan. I am not going to talk about the recommended performance levels today. We're going to wait until the year ends, until we have all the information that we can collect about some of these metrics, and then in the November meeting, we'll bring back the recommended performance levels for each of those metrics, the threshold, the target, and the stretch numbers. Okay? So I thought maybe it might be helpful for our two new board members, for Steve, to kind of give an overview of what the annual incentive plan is and what the long-term incentive plan is before he gets into discussion about the year-to-date performance, if that's okay.
All right.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you all for having me here. Nice to see you. And I'm Steve Sullivan with Perlmeyer. I'm a managing director. The whole time I've worked with JPS, I've been working out of our Houston office, and as of about 3 weeks ago, now I work out of our Chicago office, so just a little bit longer flight.
Which office?
Chicago. Yeah, I think.
You missed the rain.
Yeah, the flooding, and they had, 9 days were over 98 degrees and over 95% humidity in a row. So I know. But I am looking forward to the polar vortex this January. So anyway, so I understand from Bill that a couple of you are new to the board and haven't gone through this. So I'll just take a couple of minutes and explain the nature of the variable compensation program that they have at JPS. So as is becoming kind of the norm in, let's say, $750 million, $1 billion and a half dollar revenue healthcare systems, they have established a short-term annual incentive plan, and then they also have a long-term incentive plan, which is multi-year measurement periods. The idea is that, like a lot of healthcare providers in this environment with the insurance industry issues and taxes and all kinds of financial adjustments, they are going through a transformation, trying to turn this organization into something a little different than it's been traditionally, and they're all going through that. I sit through meetings like this, every week all over the country. And so the idea is why you want to have a two-tiered incentive program is that some of the things that this executive team is trying to do is going to take a while. It's complex, bringing about elevating their level of care, elevating their level of quality, elevating their efficiency. Those that don't spend a lot of time in healthcare, basically healthcare is riding on three, tenets. One is high levels of clinical care. Number two is high levels of patient experience. And number three is efficiency, financial and operational. So as a HR committee member, if you were looking at an incentive plan for the first time, you'd look to see that at least one or two or all three of those are in there somewhere, because we call that the triple aim of healthcare, and you want to make sure that this team is aimed in the right direction, which is excelling in those three areas as well as some others. So the longer-term plan is, as currently constituted, is 2 metrics. And in a couple minutes, we're going to go through a document that provides this in a little more detail. But JPS participates in a clinical quality national program called Leapfrog. You can Google it, or you've probably heard about it. So JPS looks at their Leapfrog score, and by the way, that score is what we call a relative score, meaning it compares them to other institutions. So it's not just how well do we do against our own goals, it's how well do we do against other providers. And then the other metric is stewardship, and so cost per adjusted patient admission. And so there's 2 of the triple aim right there, right? One of them is clinical quality and safety, the other one is efficiency, because cost per adjusted admission is all about efficiency. So that's a very solid, in my opinion anyway, a very solidly based LTIP that's on 2 of the triple aim. Their annual incentive plan, and then like many, the idea is that every year we have things that we really have to focus on that are very acute, they're very important. There are things that we need to improve on that are keeping us from getting a better reimbursement from the payers, or keeping us from, getting more patients to come in for whatever reasons. And so the annual incentive plan, which I'm not going to go through all the metrics right now, but we'll go through it in a couple minutes in this pay-for-performance analysis. But suffice it to say that they're measuring quality and some people measures and stewardship and service. So again, heavily based on the triple aim of healthcare. So this program, as it's currently constituted, has been in place now, I think, 4 years. And the long-term incentive plan started out a little different. We were phasing those metrics out, and we've got the leapfrog and the efficiency in there. The idea behind the LTIP is to keep those metrics the same for as long as possible, so that everybody that's in the plan understands what the game is, and they understand what's being measured, and they develop programs and teams to drive higher levels of performance. So if you're on the board and you have a big LTIP payout, a long-term incentive payout, it's probably a good thing, because that means that there were high levels of clinical quality for patients, and there was also a great deal of efficiency, that they made good use of capital resources. Is that going to get us to where we need to be? That's the program as it stands right now. So I came in today to, number one, to talk about what we do every year. We actually do it a couple times a year for JPS. We look at a pay-for-performance analysis. Is this? Yep. So what does that mean? Well, if I'm on the HR committee, I want to know who's in the incentive plans, how much it costs, what does it measure, how did we perform against those measures as an organization, what was the incentive award, what were the incentive awards that were created, and then where does that position us to the market? Are we competitive? The idea is that with this as a tool, this is really a governance tool. If you're on the committee, you can say, well, God, we're doing terrible, and, our leapfrog score is bad, and we weren't efficient, and our, patient satisfaction is low. Why do we have these giant incentive awards? Or the reverse of that, which is, the team's really doing well, they're demonstrating very high levels of performance and achievement on these metrics. Why aren't our incentives, higher? So it's your chance to really understand what's going on and to see if there's anything that's out of whack. It's an assessment tool, really. Okay? So if you have this, you're on page 2, and what that is now, I talked about annual incentive and long-term incentive. So base salary plus annual incentive, that's called total cash compensation. That's what this page 2 is. When you add on the LTIP, the long-term incentive plan, that's called total direct compensation, and that comes later. So this is just incentive, base salary and annual incentive. So at JPS, there are 4 tiers of participants in these plans. So tier 1 is your CEO. Tier 2 are your EVPs, there's 2 of them. Tier 3 are like SVPs, and tier 4 is mostly VPs, I think there's 13. So about 23 people all told in this thing. And so when you look at those numbers, like under base salary, so FY 17-18, that was last year. FY 18-19, that's the year that ended September 30th, right? So that is just a sum of all of their salaries of the people, of the employees that are in that tier. At JPS, the annual incentive is 10% of base salary at target for everyone. A lot of organizations you'll see, you know, the tier 1, the CEO is going to have like 30%, tier 2 is 20%, you know, on the way down. They took a little different approach here, and they made everybody's annual incentive plan the same award opportunity level as a percent of base. Where they differ the tiers is in the long-term incentive plan. So the higher the tier you are, the greater your opportunity, or I should say exposure to the long-term incentive plan. So when it says, you know, 91.3 there in the dark green below, all that really, or 87.3, all that really means is on average for total cash comp, base salary was 91 or 93% of total cash. In the next one over, FY 18-19, they're lower. That's because the annual incentive was higher for this last year. It means it's just like a water bubble, you know. It's going to go up or down depending on how big or how small the annual incentive plan is. That's all that means. Whoop. We're back. Down at the bottom there, it actually tells you how many people are in each tier. And it also kind of explains what I just explained, but the writing's pretty small, so I went through it. Any questions on this one?
I might say there's one exception to what Steve explained on the annual incentive plan. Every employee participates in that plan.
Right.
But below the manager level, it's a $500 award based on performance. It's not 10% of salary, but $500. That's the difference.
And while Pearl Harbor doesn't manage that part of the program, I will just give you a commentary that I wish we had more of our, you know, healthcare clients put more of their employees in something where they're exposed to the business results and understand what's good and what's bad, and learn over time how to impact it by virtue of their own performance. So to me, that's a very positive move by JPS to have some variable opportunity based on how well the organization does. So we all share in our success or vice versa. So if you go to page 3, oh, yes.
I may have missed something. On tier 3,
Oh,
what is it? The big jump on the next black one. What's the big jump between 184, 185, and 415?
185.
Where are you looking, DT?
The tier 3.
185.
Tier
Oh.
3.
Number of participants.
Was that because of open position and then now we fill them?
Yeah, we had open positions when the last thing was done, and now you filled them with people who got an incentive award.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is a big jump. Good eye. So this is the year before, the one that just ended, September 30th. So if you don't mind, I'm going to, for lack of time, I'm going to go to, okay, so this is the 2019 annual incentive results through September. So on the left half of the sheet, you'll see the quality, people, stewardship, service. And then within that, those speedometers are actually what the metric is. So if somebody walks up to you at the grocery store and says, do you measure anything on people? You can say, yeah. We measure voluntary turnover, we measure employee engagement, and we measure provider or physician engagement. For any of these, you can say that. And so target up at the top of each speedometer, that reflects what they're trying to hit. That's what the organization would like to hit. From an executive compensation standpoint, over the years we've worked with JPS, so now when they name a target, that equals about a 50% chance of likelihood of achieving it, right? So we probably have about a 50% chance or so of hitting target. So target is very important because, remember I said how the annual incentive plan is 10% for everybody? If the big dial on the right, which is a consolidation of all the it's a calculation of all the performance levels on the left, if that speedometer would have been right straight up at target, that mean everybody would get 10% of their salary. In this particular example, though, you see it's 145.57 over on the right there. That means that 100% would have been target. So they're 45.5% above target, which means that these incentive awards they're going to be more than 10%. They're going to be higher than that. Okay, so some organizations you might be familiar with, they just credit you on the last kind of point that you hit. Like, for example, the arrow this year is at 145.57. What they would do is they'd say, well, you're going to get target because you made it to target. Or if the arrow was below a little bit target, well, you're going to get threshold because that's the last break point that you made it past. At JPS, we do what's called an interpolation formula to calculate the size of the award. And what that means is you get credit for every amount that you perform. It just so happens that target is tied into your target level of award. Anything you get above there, though, you get credit for. It's also important to note that in healthcare, mostly what we do is we say, okay, so if target is 10%, threshold is going to be 5% of salary, which is half. Maximum or stretch is going to be 20%, not 15. It's going to be double. And the reason we do that in healthcare is because if these things are set up right and calibrated right, it's very difficult. You're also adding in a measure of difficulty by having an annual incentive and an LTIP. Very difficult to do well on all that in the same year. So what we say is if the team really demonstrates performance above target and starts moving towards stretch or maximum, we want to give them credit for it. You also need to know that the annual incentive target of 10% and each of the long-term incentive targets for each tier, those have been calibrated to the market analysis that we do every year, so that ideally, if you have a salary that is kind of right at the median of the market and you get a 10% annual right on target, and if your target for the LTIP is 15% or 20%, that's going to put your total direct compensation right around the market median of total cash. So that calibration that's one of the things that they rely on us for, is every year to check that. Okay, so target performance for everyone equals more or less, should equal median level pay in the market, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So any questions on these metrics or the kind of the way we combine them up to create the overall performance or anything like that?
Just the note at the bottom.
It's hard for me to read that.
The exclusion.
I've got it here.
It's the start.
Oh, yeah. So that individual has practicing physician responsibilities as a doctor. And so what we do is we say that we want to run safe out of like laws like Stark laws or anti-kickback laws.
For compliance stuff.
Yeah, and what those laws say is you don't want to have a practicing physician sharing in gains made from driving more business into the system and things like that. So he's just getting measured on it excludes the operating margin metric. Rather, it's going to be on quality service, turnover, and employee engagement and provider engagement. That's all.
That's great.
We had to create kind of a special little annual or special incentive plan for him.
I'm glad you guys looking into that. Great. Good job.
All right. Any others? I'm going to move on. So the long-term incentive plan. So this incentive plan is a 3-year performance period, but they overlap. So that every year, if I'm an executive at JPS, I get a grant of shares that's equal to my target long-term incentive value. So remember I said annual incentive is 10% for everybody? The LTIP actually is like 30% for Tier 1, 25% for Tier 2, 20% for Tier 3, and so on. So if I'm in tier 2, if I'm one of the EVPs, I'm going to get a number of shares granted to me at the beginning of each year that's worth 25% of my base salary. And then depending on what happens over the course of 3 years, the value of those shares will go up or down. And that totally depends on how JPS performs against Leapfrog and cost per adjusted patient admission. Now, this particular page has some different metrics on the far left. That's because when we first started the LTIP, that was our LTIP. Reduce preventable harm composite and reduce ambulatory care conditions. We changed the LTIP design midstream because the team decided that no longer captured what they were trying to achieve. And so I think it was, well, 3 years ago, we switched to pure Leapfrog and pure cost per adjusted patient admission. But because these are overlapping and they get granted every year, we had to ride out the old metrics. So actually to calculate the incentive award, we had to incorporate the performance against those old metrics as part of the measure. So the way we set these targets is that we don't set them for 36 months, we set them for 12 months. It's too hard to set a 3-year measure in almost anything these days. So we say is, we compare your performance to target 3 years in a row, and we do an average. It's just an average. And so if in year 1 you were 90% of target, in year 2 you were right at target or 100%, in year 3 you were at 110% or 10% above target, the 3-year average is going to be 100. It's going to be the average of those 3 numbers, so right at target. So whenever you see, I'm gonna go to the. This is the LTIP grant that's still going on, that's got 1 more year to go, which will get paid out at the end, a year from now. So if you go back to the one I just had, see they were above target, 116.72 over on the right. And then right now, it's fallen a little bit. They're right at about 100, a little over. That means that 3-year average for each of those 2 things drove it up or down. Don't forget that. Yes, sir.
Is there any precedent or justification for weighting that average toward the end of the scale?
Yep, it happens sometimes. It's called like recency or primacy. Like we'll weight the 3rd year more or the 1st year more.
Right.
In certain plans, that's effective. In this particular one, where it's just all overlapping, all you'd really get out of that is the 3rd year of the one you're getting paid on right now, you'd get a little more of that. The 3rd year of the one that gets paid out next year, you'd get a little more of that. So you know what I mean? It would, over time, it would kind of even out.
Yeah.
So when you see weighting by timing or by year, that tends to be more discrete LTIPs, which are end-to-end, and some organizations have those. In healthcare, we believe that the overlapping ongoing annual grants is the way to go because it's a retention tool. When you do the discrete end-to-end, so I work really hard for 3 years, I find out near the end of year 2, we're not going to make it. You know, we're not going to even be hardly above threshold. I've been thinking about leaving. I'm not going to stay around for the payout. It's going to be small. Whereas in this plan, you've always got another 2 years ahead of you that are vesting. And if we turn things around and when we do the interpolation, we always have a chance to keep improving. So it is a little better retention tool. Yeah, not at all.
When do we look at the targets and the thresholds and raising the bar, so to speak?
Well, that's a great question because today we're going to look, after we're done talking about this, with what you're going to measure next year. And then I think in a meeting after that, in November, we'll look at where they want to set the target and the threshold and the stretch. So that's all.
I mean, that's the reason I tell you when we're doing it, because we make sure as we look at some things that if we hit 200%, the stretch, do we keep that or do we change it? So that's when we do that.
Dorothy has been through the war a few times on this, so she knows. And what Dorothy will do is she'll say, tell me why, 13 is a 50% chance. Show me some data.
What I've learned is whatever Dorothy wants, Dorothy gets.
Well, my point is that my point is that Dorothy actually tries to pry it open a little bit and tell me why you're setting it this low or this high, which is what you need to do as an HR committee member. You need to verse yourself in their financials. You need to learn about leapfrog. I mean, this LTIP, leapfrog and the adjusted patient admission, this is, in tier 1 or tier 2, this is like 2/3 of their incentive program. The annual is just 10% of their salary. This is much more. And over time, this can really be an important part of, it is an important part of the annual incentive plan. So if you're on this committee, you want to work to understand leapfrog as a program and why JPS is where it is. And you definitely want to understand their finances so you understand how they go about reducing the cost of patient admission. Okay. So I had mentioned the last thing we look at is then, okay, given this performance, given these people, given everything else, where do we stand against the market? And so down at the bottom, those speedometers are different. Those are market positioning or compa ratios. And now, so tier 1, that means that it's your CEO. The CEO's total direct comp, which is the salary plus the annual incentive plus the LTIP, is below median. Well, we happen to know that your CEO salary is below median. So there's only one person there, so it's not very hard to figure out why because we have it calibrated so that if the CEO's salary was at median, total direct comp would probably be pretty close to median. Other ones are higher or lower based on mostly who's in the tier. So for example, tier 3, like SVPs, coming out a little higher. I know over the last couple of years they brought in some folks at higher salaries to get them, and so that's a factor there. That's just the paying the freight to get people in this environment. And you don't want to look at this in one isolated year. If you're on the HR committee, you want to keep these that I give you and put like 3 of them across your desk and say longitudinally, how are we? I mean, okay, in September of 2019, Steve showed us this and we were here. The year before that, we were here. The year before that. So keep these things, and you want to look at them one over the other, not just one in isolation. Because we're always trying to get better at having their pay reflect how they perform. The idea is that here at JPS, with stretch or maximum being double the target, if they perform very well year over year and they sustain a high level of performance like against leapfrog and adjusted patient admission, their compensation is going to be pretty aggressive to the market. And our position is, well, it should be. You're giving them an opportunity to do things that the board wants, that help the people of Tarrant County and make patients healthy. If leapfrog is high, people are going to get healthier sooner or later. So that's a good thing, and everybody wins. What else can I answer on this? DT, that's the fewest questions you ever asked.
Thing that all the staff behind you would say is, do not poke the bear, ever.
Don't poke the bear.
Do not poke the bear. So we're going to move on. Since DT has no questions and you have poked the bear, we're going to move on.
I have one. Actually, anything that we should learn from feedback from the staff, from recruiting effort that we should, for consideration?
Anything we should learn from the staff?
That you guys learn from the staff or from the people that, regarding to our compensation that we should be looking at to help us do a better job as we set up next year's compensation and all that stuff.
I'm sorry, did you say anything you should learn or I should learn?
No, you guys can give us feedback that we should be aware of.
Just that you're now starting to realize the benefit of doing this for several years, where they better understand how to set targets. The first couple of years are hard, but I think that Robert and Bill and Sharon and Pia and others that help, and people in this room, by the way, that are here, help us figure out what the target should be. I think they're just getting better at it every year, and I think they really try their best to make it be 50% chance. Because you know what, if you say it's higher or lower, sooner or later it's going to catch up with you. This thing goes on and on. If you're padding your part, as they say, sooner or later it's going to come out. So the best thing to do is just do it straight up.
This will achieve what we're trying to get is attractive, but yet still bring out the passion in the people that work here.
I think this brings out the passion of people who work here who are like that.
Okay.
I mean, in healthcare, I go back 25 years. In healthcare, we always had a lot of people that they called them administrators. And they didn't want an incentive plan. They just wanted to get their salary and, you know, do their job. That's all changing now. Healthcare is bringing in people from other industries, different types of folks that are more used to having something like this. And I think from a recruiting standpoint, if you put this program in front of a candidate, like for CEO for that matter, COO, CFO, whatever, you're gonna separate the people who wanna roll up their sleeves and get to it from the ones who just want that salary. And I think that's a good thing. This is a hard environment and you need people that wanna work.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on that? All right. So why don't we just move right on into the organizational goals updates? Because I know on the agenda it shows PO coming up, but let's just, you're there, just go right ahead into your next item.
Okay. Let's see, it's behind my tab 3. I don't know what page it is on the board portal, but it's actually got a title of Annual Incentive Plan Fiscal Year to Date 2019, which is probably mislabeled.
Yeah,
Yeah.
15 on the portal.
Because this is what, no, that's actual performance.
2020?
So 2020, what page is 2020 proposed annual incentive plan on?
I just have the little packet.
16 of 19. Okay, 16 of 19, that's where we're gonna focus. Can you page me there?
Yeah, I was trying, but it went to,
I can get there.
oh, there you go. Sorry.
I can get there,
That's it.
there we go, this is it. So, if you look at that big screen and pay attention to that vertical line in the middle of the screen, that's where I want to focus attention, to the left of that vertical line. Because we're going to bring back recommendations in November in regard to performance metrics. What I want to talk about today is what those metrics, those goals might be for 2020 for the annual incentive plan. We would propose that we continue with PSI 90, which is a composite metric of 10 or 11 different indicators. And we've made great progress this year. We're going to stretch ourselves next year and do even better. But I think that's important because that does affect our leapfrog scores as well. It's a very important patient safety metric. In addition to that, we only had one quality metric last year, or this year, right? We want to propose that we expand that quality pillar to include 2 metrics. The second being ED throughput. Big deal. Any patient that we have boarding in our ED over 4 hours is not a good thing. Something from a morbidity or mortality, God forbid, is going to happen to that patient. So we've established a throughput committee that we're meeting every week to talk about improved throughput of this organization. But we want to focus on minimizing the boarding that takes place in our emergency department. And there's a number of things one can do. There's not any one thing. But I think it's important for this organization to keep the eye on the ball of minimizing all that volume that's coming to our ED that ends up boarding on a wall, waiting for a bed to be admitted to. So I think it's a highly important quality metric. It's a highly important patient safety metric. And we'll bring back the baseline of where we are year to date, ending September, and propose levels of performance for 2020. Let me ask you a question about that.
Sure.
How much of that is quantitative versus qualitative? Because
What do you mean?
facility, well,
You don't have
the
any
number of
space for it.
beds that we have is a
Right.
major factor in that number.
Mhm.
It is. If we've got, 350 people coming in there tomorrow and 400 come in the next day, then the quantitative part of this metric suffers dramatically. Because
Well, I agree. I agree. It's incumbent upon this organization to find ways to move that dial. And Michael and Wanda have been extremely instrumental in bringing a large multidisciplinary team together. And when I say we're meeting every week on throughput, that's what we're doing. And we're already moving the needle. You need to find a way to optimize the beds that you've got, right? We've only got so many beds. And there's only so much we can do. But I think there is more that we can do than we're doing today. That's what this metric is about, is continuing to keep your foot on the accelerator for that particular metric, meet every week, and find ways that we can minimize. There's some things we can do on the front end from a clinic perspective, being proactive, getting ahead of the game, focusing on those chronic conditions among our connection population. Try to find ways to prevent them from even coming to the ED. That'll minimize the volume. So I think it's a metric well worth considering for next year. Extremely participative from the provider section. We probably got at least 10, if not more, providers there every week.
I realize it's critical. However, when we're looking at annual incentives, I'm thinking about how will it impact the overall, everybody, all of the leadership team. I believe this need to be monitored, and I believe it should be reported up to. I just don't think it's one of those for your annual incentive. I think that, you know, if that would be something that could be reported up to quality to keep your foot on the pulse and all of that. Now, that's what I see. Steve, am I off target or?
Well, so I look at these a little differently just because I'm like a compensation geek, but when you set up variable pay programs, one of the really critical things you look at is ability to impact results. In other words, you're going to hold me accountable for 10% of my salary, whatever, and you're telling me it's only you can only earn it if you're able to bring about improvement, you know, in these areas. So I guess my question would be, when we look at the everybody that's in this plan, and I know below VP it's a $500 opportunity, but VP and above it's 10% of your salary. Can all 23 of those people, do they impact this by virtue of their job? Or rather, is this just a small group of people who will kind of make this thing improve or not make it improve? I say that's just a question I have.
I can't think of anyone who's not involved in throughput.
Neither can
I can't. I'm looking around the room on the throughput meeting. I can't think of an executive that's not there.
Well,
Everybody can play a role in that.
Let me probably put it another way with Trent. We only have so many beds. And so now we are saying I'm not saying we shouldn't look at it, but if you already have all the beds full and you have patients, can't close the ER, we're going to have more of them waiting. That's going to be a longer wait that's going to show up. Overall, I know we can do some things, but I'm not seeing this as one of those. Not saying it's not important. I think the ER and nursing should look at it. I think it should be reported up. I just don't see that for your quality to be on your annual incentive right now. How long have y'all been monitoring this? I mean, I know you've been monitoring it forever.
Yeah.
But I don't remember seeing any report on it, do you?
Yeah, we used to. Absolutely.
No, we see it at quality committee.
That all started in 2008.
Well, let me just say this. I sit on quality. I would think that this might be one of the quality dashboards that we would be monitoring. I'm not saying it shouldn't be monitored. I'm just saying, I'm just looking at it being on the annual incentive. I know we have a lot of people coming to the meetings, and I know that the physicians, the ER doctors that's working there, the nurses, and inpatient service. That's what I see.
I certainly appreciate Dorothy's opinion, and actually, I think staff's being hard on itself. But I think if we're not hard on ourselves, we're going to be counterintuitive to our own efficiency, and we're going to be counterintuitive to one of our biggest problems. And every time we have a boarding issue, we have patient satisfaction issues, and if we just report it up, I think we're all going to get slightly complacent that we're reporting the all bad numbers. So staff has actually taken on a fairly Herculean task, and the people that will be the most affected by this are managers and above, definitely. It's a hard one, and I agree with you, Trent. If you're limited to a certain amount of beds and 150 people show up in a 2-hour span of time, what are you going to do? But I just think we as a staff commit ourselves to the most difficult of challenges, and that's what I think you all as a board want us to do.
For example, Robert, with your 150 beds that are full, there are ways that you can make some of those beds not full. That's correct. Such as early rounds, evening rounds, prescriptions written an hour before dismissal, an area for people where they have been dismissed from the hospital where they can go with a sitter or something like that until they go home. So there are lots of opportunities, and I would take the stance that we keep this right where it is. That's my approach.
What is the average, Steve? What's the metric that we're comparing to? What are the average rates that we would expect to see on this metric?
Right.
Well, like I said previously, anything above 4 is never good for the patient. Never. And I know that you got.
I remember days in this organization when it was 12.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
there's more than that.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
So we looked at left without being seen, we looked at, Dorothy admit, we looked at all these.
We still look at that.
Those are all crucial ones, but my question here, if we look at this as a standalone metric with these sort of implications in terms of the LTIP, does moving the dial on this, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, what does that put us in terms of comparison to the average that we think we ought to be compared to? Because I'm trying to scale this as well as I am trying to warrant it. And I'm trying to understand how the scale of it relates to the averages that we're trying to achieve.
How much improvement is worth how much money?
Yeah, better said. Now, is that a November discussion, or is that a?
Well, depending on whether or not this metric remains as an annual incentive metric.
Well, I think it's.
Regardless, it would be a November discussion based on where we end the year.
I think part of the discussion that we can have in November, if it's gonna stay on there, is what do I compare it with? I don't wanna just look at our numbers, because we might be trying to do something, and Baylor All Saint is having 4 and 5 hours. What will be our comparative data beside ourselves?
Relative to what?
Right.
2 other level 1 trauma public hospitals.
Other traumas,
If we can get that information.
we can look at it.
No, we're already pretty
Well,
good.
No, I wouldn't say that, because I had a nephew waiting for a bed for over 12 over there. They was in the ER, Baylor All Saint, they were backed up too. So what do you compare it to, and is there a measurement that we can look at? I mean, do any other hospitals, is this reported out anywhere?
It is. I mean, I think you're at, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, 180 minutes is the benchmark for EDs over 140,000? Is that what it is?
This is a
Mike, I'll have Michael, come on up.
Come
so
on
we
up,
can give you a mic. We didn't equip you with the lavalier. We should have.
But you're still sitting in the back.
So this is a nationally tracked benchmark. It's median decision to admit to inpatient bed. It is a proxy for your efficiencies throughout the house. It's a proxy for how you maximize your bed capacity. It's a proxy for are you appropriately taking care of your patients and moving them through the system effectively. And we know that there are plenty of evidence-based studies that do show that patients that are waiting in the ED more than 4 hours for a bed have a higher risk of morbidity and mortality. There is an ED benchmarking alliance which looks at a variety of emergency departments across the country. And for EDs that have a volume of over 120,000, the national average at this point in time is 190 minutes. So our numbers are well above what that 190 minutes is. Now, again, it doesn't break it down into, is it a public hospital, is it a private hospital, but it's an ED that's over 120,000 volume, which is ours. So there is a national benchmark that you can compare this to. You know, the other question about who does this impact, it does impact almost every single point of contact in some fashion in the organization, from environmental services to the ability to get patients appropriate appointments upon discharge from the hospital, to our physicians and how they do their consults and get patients in there. And so this is something that really does touch upon multiple areas of the organization and has a high level of patient safety and quality exposure that we have if we don't do better than what we've traditionally done.
Well, let me just say it another way. If we are going to put it in, then we're gonna do some benchmarks. And so I don't want you to come back and say at that point, well, we're a public hospital and we don't have those. So if we're gonna do 120,000 volume, then let's make sure that what we are developing our threshold and target and stretch is looking at something that we can measure. And if we can't get public hospitals, then we're gonna use what we have. And so it's gonna be a real measurement. I mean, not just on hours. So bring that back next month. Have me some facts and stuff from wherever we're pulling this and what source it's coming from, you know? Because I do understand staying in the ER causes other problems, causes some problems. But I also know on that PSI, you got some major problems that we need to be addressing. So you got two big ones there. So.
We do.
Okay.
Now, clarification. Mm-hmm. Are you saying if we can't compare our ED throughput to another?
No, she's saying and I'll try. If you can't find other public hospitals to compare to, then you be okay with everybody being in the group, so we can't come back and say, well, this doesn't really apply to us because it's comparing us to non-publics. Right. So if we're in a comparable group, we're going to be with everybody, or there's going to be a subsection of publics. But either which way, if we agree to this, we're in for the whole deal.
Well, yeah, because we envision just an improvement over self. We did.
Yeah, I mean, and if we want to do an improvement over self, I think it can be in the department. But if you want to be paid annually, it's going to have to be some type of measurement so you can actually make sure that's volume. And the only reason I'm concerned about it is you have a limit on your beds. And right now, you have a limit. So I just kind of want that for us to know that. It can't compare it to yourself.
I understand. I think we will be, is for the purposes of this discussion, which has been helpful, is I think in November, we come back and you all feel if you are comfortable with what those comparables are, and base it on that. And quite frankly, for us, this could be good deeds gone punished. I mean, we as a staff are putting ourselves out there. We know it.
My biggest concern, Robert, because this is not a single, this is not a single measurable variable at all, because we could measure it more fairly from the staff's perspective if this was a ratio to volume.
Right.
And if it were a ratio to volume, I could make the argument that this, because, I mean, Chuck and I can both sit here and tell you on the last 10 years on this board, we believe this is a crucial variable. I mean, we spent hours and months and weeks on this. And I am not in any way saying it doesn't merit the consideration that you're giving it. I'm only saying, have we really put it into a truly measurable, fair, objective, metric that says relative to a 20% increase in ED next year. I don't think that's gonna happen, but I didn't think we'd see 40% over 3 years either, but we did.
You're trying to save us from ourselves.
I am. I mean, I think there's a
Well,
difficulty
they both
here.
are, and we get it. And all the arguments that y'all are debating, we have debated staff-wise as well. And I think our conclusion was, we wanted to put forward this measure because one, is so critical, and two, it is imperfect. We get it. So where I think we ought to be with your comments, which I appreciate greatly, your comments, which I appreciate greatly, is come to y'all in November and say, here is the measurable, and y'all. Yep.
So it'd be,
It's November, I believe, yeah. And I think what we'll do is then kind of vote it up or down. And we, quite frankly, we'll live by either one, we're okay, because even amongst family members, we have debated this long and hard to where we didn't want to look at family members anymore. So we're okay debating it.
I would also add, how are you taking into consideration code yellows when that happens? And
Take into consideration.
Code yellows.
Code yellows, when that happens in the ED, and what those patient volume hours really look like. And those external kind of factors that really do weight that particular number.
They do. They do.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it from the median, I mean, the statistical, what you're trying to do is just put out all the outliers of your days when you've got exceptionally high volume and the outliers where you've got exceptionally low volume, and obviously you get your statistically significant median there. That's why we're not using average here, because that's what'll count for your outliers. And so, our hope is we don't want to be in code yellows. And so a lot of our, this initiation of the regular throughput committee was born out of the fact that we were having multiple code yellows. And what we have seen as we've gone and looked at our length of stay on the house, and we looked at what's called our GMLOS, which is what would be a national benchmark, comparatively to our acuity mix, there's a little bit of an imbalance there. And so this is an opportunity for us to look at our utilization patterns, our appropriateness of care, ties back to some of the comments, certainly DT and Dorothy, you had even at the last meeting about, how do we do utilization? How do we approach all those aspects? And this affords us an opportunity as a proxy measure to begin to encapsulate a lot of that work.
One more question. Is, if I'm reading this correctly and your intent correctly, am I measuring the same thing when I say decision to admit time? In other words, the decision to put you in a room, is that the same as the time I get into a room?
No.
Okay, so then.
This is decision to admit in a bed. This is not decision to admit. This is actual time from decision to admit that patient to the time that patient gets in a bed.
And a variable in that decision is whether or not there's an available bed, right?
Correct, absolutely.
Yeah, this is
So it's
physically
not-
in a bed.
Okay, so it's not, it is. I mean, it's an apples to apples comparison. It's not a circumstance where the doctor says, well, I'm making the decision to admit, and.
They don't get a bed.
Yeah, that doesn't
No.
They say,
count.
well, I'm
That
sorry,
doesn't count.
an hour and a half from now, we can.
Counts when they're in the bed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
then I'm
and this
measuring it.
exclude observation patients.
OBS is not
OBS
included.
is
OBS is not included in this. This is just the ones that are decision to admit.
Urgent care is not included in this.
From a exec comp standpoint, I think the committee's on the right track that when you can, you want to see a relative measure as opposed to an absolute measure. In other words, how do we stack up? And I think Trent is on the right track with wanting to look at volume too, because I deal with inner city hospitals in other cities, and some of them are, would you say 120,000 a year come through? Some are half of that.
We're higher than that.
We're 350 a day.
120,000 is the compare.
Oh, okay. But some are very low and some are very high. You can imagine that has a huge impact of it. I wonder whether or not you can factor the data by CMI, by case mix index, in terms of the stuff that's coming in the door versus, simple stuff.
Well, you're not going to admit simple stuff. Right?
You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't get simple stuff.
And I'd be very cautious about putting CMI data on an incentive plan, because you don't want individuals
Gaming that,
to to game the system in a certain way from a CMI perspective.
Yeah, we have some clients with it in there on their LTIP actually, and I think we've gotten to the point.
It's a
with that.
challenge.
It's a challenge, you gotta stay on top of it.
You do.
So I agree with you.
Courage, guys, honest to God, I really do salute the courage. And I'm on board with it, I'm just not sure that we're not cutting our
Well,
nose off.
we've got more than a couple of type A personalities that, want to push the envelope and do better each and every year, and it's challenging. We get it. Appreciate the discussion.
I guess being new, have we been measuring quality, or is this something we're just starting to do brand new?
No, we have quality.
Always been measuring this.
So I guess my question is, if you've been measuring this for 2 or 3 years, you ought to have some kind of data as to whether it's a good thing for the staff or a bad thing for the staff, right? That's what we're really discussing here, isn't it?
Right.
Is this something that is fair to the employees, or the management here, versus something that's not? And if we've been measuring it before, we should have some information that tells us whether this is.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's not the information that we lack. We have the information. The question is should staff be incentivized to get that person from the ED, from that process, and into a bed? All the data's there.
But Zim is right on, we have the data. I've been serving on the quality committee for almost as long as I've been on the board. I have never seen this come to that quality committee as a report.
Well, remember, Dorothy, we used to have a scorecard that was over 80 metrics. Oh, yeah. That was, there's 1,000+ metrics we could measure every single day. So you gotta choose the most critical ones, but I think there was a metric about that on that scorecard.
Well, let me just say it this way. Here's what I would think as coming to here to be put on an incentive plan. There should be a history of it. That would be something that you would be showing. Here is where we've been monitoring, here's where we've tried to go and all that. But let me just say it another way. I have been on the quality committee since I've been here. Now, I'm pretty good at data. And I don't remember the 80-page score sheet because it shouldn't be 80. Okay, I don't remember the score sheet having, a scorecard having that many. And so I would just think that if you're bringing it here, you should have some history on it so somebody could look at it.
I'm just saying, we keep asking a question as to whether this is a valid metric or not, and a fair metric, and yet we ought to have something that says whether it's that way or not. That's all I'm saying. Now, one other thing, can somebody define for me threshold, target, and stretch?
Steve, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure, so we have to, like Bill just brought up our organizational scorecard. Well, this really is not an organizational scorecard. This is just cherry picking as few as possible that are critical for us. And so threshold, target, and stretch are just levels of performance that will yield different levels of pay.
The reason I ask is that when I was in business, threshold was the minimum that was acceptable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Target was a goal.
Yeah.
And then stretch was if you went over that goal. And yet I look up here and I see a target of 98 and a stretch of 88, and I don't understand that.
That's because with the PSI 90, 1 is where you sort of want to be, but any number lower than that is exceptional.
It's like a golf score.
Well, mine go higher.
Not your golf score.
Low is good.
Mine go higher.
Go the other way on this one.
That's a reverse.
Okay, so it's an index.
Reverse one.
Okay.
Target is your target that you're trying to hit, and that's associated with your target level incentive. Anything below or above that, your incentive will go up or down.
And one other question, is this a team measurement? In other words, the entire team gets it, or if there's a player?
The whole organization.
Oh, okay, that's all I need to know, thank you.
And back to the discussion about threshold, target, and stretch, Steve's given us some philosophies around that 10% of the time, you're gonna hit stretch. 50% of the time, you'll hit target. 90% of the time you'll hit threshold. That's how you kind of establish those performance metrics.
Can I just throw something out, totally different? Why don't we look at surgery, start time? Because if start time is not correct,
Well,
there's a
look
lot
at
more.
infections, post-surgical infections.
Yes, all that stuff, but
I mean, I think there's so many to choose from, but I don't know if all of them reach all the disciplines that this one does.
Yeah, surgical infection would not.
Would not. It wouldn't
No.
be, it's a good one, and it's good, but it wouldn't be across the board.
And PSI 90 is a predominantly very heavy surgery metric.
Oh, yeah.
Very heavy. And so it takes into account a lot of things that occur in the post-operative period.
Correct.
Sepsis, infection, DVT. And so we wanted to find another metric that would also help involve the rest of the organization.
I just want to state, just when it comes to incentive plan, that I will always go towards the harder to achieve. So I like the fact that we're judging against ourselves, but I do like the fact that we can compare to, this seems really loud, that we can compare and use as a comparison maybe to set the threshold target and stretch, or to at least evaluate where those goal lines should be. But I'm a huge fan of judging on ourselves, because that's, in this instance, seems to be the most difficult metric.
Well, we want to thank y'all because your opinions have been very identical to staff. They're all over on this one, and we're trying to figure out how to do this one right. It is a tough, not necessarily a wrong or a right, but I'm proud of the staff. Whether y'all go with this or not, I'm proud of the staff by putting themselves out there. They did not take the easy route on this one. To Trent's point, can it be measured properly? We got to work that out, but I'm really impressed with the team because we said we'll put ourselves out there, right or wrong.
One takeaway, Robert, is to elevate it to the quality committee reporting.
No, it's gonna be there.
I mean, you know, that way that question's out of the way because this data exists and we've seen it many times. It's just a question of what has it done over the years.
Exactly, and I think that's where we are, Trent. We've seen this, y'all have seen this. Now the question is how level of accountability do we hold? To Michael's point, you put this on this, EVS changes their attitude. Our doctors, our hospitalists, it is across the board. So I don't want to talk it to no pun, don't want to talk it to death, but I do think that this warrants this kind of discussion.
Okay. Any other?
Point number 2.
Moving right
Yeah, our second point in today's debate.
Michael, don't go away, don't go away.
Yeah, Michael's done. Michael's done.
I don't think so.
We're recommending that we keep the same 2 metrics. HCAHPS, which is a nationally recognized survey where we can compare ourselves among other people. And there are 10 questions in an outpatient survey that we conducted this year. We're going to come back with new performance metrics in November, like I said. But in the HCAHPS, we have historically measured our percentile ranking for top box score or overall recommendation. We changed it this year to focus on the 10 dimensions within the HCAHPS survey. And we used as a benchmark the national rate of improvement for each one of those dimensions as measured by our vendor. For this coming year, we've got the same questions, right? But we want to move that up to the 75th percentile. We want to say we want to improve each of those dimensions at least to the 75th percentile. Not the national rate of improvement, but the 75th percentile. Again, type A, doing more, but we'll bring back more information in November. The outpatient survey, they're the same 10 questions, and we set a improvement over self of 0.3 last year. For every question in the outpatient arena that improved 0.3 or greater, we got credit for it. We're going to recommend 0.6 or greater in 2020. Okay? Any discussion about service?
Yeah, I know we're going to keep the same questions. Now we're just going from 0.3 to 0.6. So when we first started doing that, what was our measurements? Because this is
We used to participate in CG caps. CG caps was kind of like H caps, except it was an outpatient focus. So a lot of hospitals and healthcare organizations are moving away from CG caps.
Okay.
They're no longer required to do that. And they're looking at specific questions that are meaningful to our patients based on really the actions of the providers in the clinics. And we're focused on those 10 questions that do have some national comparison, although we don't have a database to compare to. But we think those are meaningful. So when you look at a 0.3 rate of improvement, that's why we got to stretch this year, right? We focused on those questions. How do you improve those questions? If you look at the national rate of improvement for HCAHPS, there's a national rate of improvement for each dimension. So we just took an arbitrary 0.3. So we got that out of the way. Now we're going to double it. We're going to try to double that performance in 2020 from where we were in 2019 for each question.
I guess when we first started this, because I'm looking at 2018, I have all of it up here. It was on percentile ranking.
That was CG caps.
That was CG caps. So we aren't using those anymore.
We're not doing CG caps. And in November, as I told Ms. Debose in our conversation before this board meeting, the committee meeting, we're going to bring back how we're comparing nationally from an HCAHPS perspective. That was one discussion that we had several months ago at this committee. Well, we kind of lost sight of percentile ranking because now we're focused on improving dimensions, right? We haven't lost sight of it. We just haven't done a good job in reporting that information to you. We'll bring that back in November.
Okay.
But Laura has been bringing, and now Rob, been bringing us to the quality committee.
To quality.
I mean, we've been looking at.
Yes.
We've been looking at those numbers, but I do not remember us looking at any quartile or percentage or anything. It was just that did we get the elements?
From an HR committee perspective, we've been focused on dimensions and have not been reporting percentile ranking. But we haven't lost sight of what that is.
Okay, so what you're looking at now is just keeping the 8 questions, and then we're just going to increase the difference between the measurements from 0.3 to point.
For a specific question, if we do not achieve a 0.6 improvement year over year, whatever these performance metrics we bring back in November, we won't get credit for it.
Okay.
If we want to improve 3 questions, 0.6 or greater, and we only achieve 0.2 or 0.5 in this case.
How did you decide on the number 0.6?
It's arbitrary.
Maybe that's my.
It's arbitrary.
Okay.
It's twice the rate of improvement from 2019.
Right.
Okay. Okay, maybe, okay. Because I looked at ambulatory, they got 8 out of 8, and so now.
8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Well, their stretch was 8, so they've got all those. So I just kind of want to say that every year when we are looking at changing this number, I'm losing something. I'm not seeing the movement that, you know, how I started with percentiles and now I'm on dimensions and getting out of 8 to 10 you get 8, and now we're changing.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
What was the decision behind ending the ranking percentiles?
We felt that we had hit the 75th percentile, and to move it from the 75th percentile was a huge ask, right? It's sustaining the 75th percentile that became even a challenge. So how do you differentiate between threshold, target, and stretch when you're talking about very, very small numbers?
Minuscule.
So if you focus on the dimensions and improving the dimensions, based on a rate higher than the national rate of improvement, our thinking was that you're going to increase your percentile ranking along the way as well.
Is there a need to have like a trigger, like we never will go below this percentile ranking? If we do, then none of it matters? You know, I'm trying to hear
That's
what.
certainly possible.
Like
I don't
established
think we've
75
lost
as
ground.
a threshold or some number as a baseline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some
that's-
number that's not, you know, that's not acceptable. We have to stay
Right.
at that or above to be in the money.
Yeah,
Some you
makes sense.
It's just a design feature. It could be like your threshold.
Well, it's possible, but if you look at it from the perspective that if you're at the 75th percentile now, and you even improve one question or two questions beyond where you are today, you're still going to maintain that ranking, right?
Yeah.
What you're saying we're not focused on is the number of questions that we're not moving or we're losing ground on.
Yeah.
Okay. That's something we can bring back in November as well.
Okay, anybody else have any questions?
Bill, when we come back in November, can we see how we compare it to some standard, whatever that standard is, national, I mean, you tell us, but something that gives us some comparison other than just against ourselves?
Correct. We'll do that. Okay. The next one is people, first-year voluntary turnover. Last year, we focused on voluntary turnover total, period. Our thinking is that we need to pay special attention to those folks that we bring on in the first year of employment. Our rate is not where we want that rate to be. If you look at this as a baseline rate of 33%, that's not acceptable. That's costly. That's bringing the right people in. That's having training them for whatever period of time and they leave before the end of the year. It's extremely costly. So again, we want to challenge ourselves to focus on keeping those folks we bring in the door, selecting the right people, making sure they're here for longer than 1 year, hopefully longer term than that. And there's national comparisons about where we should be for first-year turnover.
When you have an employee that voluntarily terminates, do you have an exit interview with them?
We do, but we can't require it. We try to solicit that information. We use that information, but there's not a policy that requires, nor can we require every employee to submit to that exit interview.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how this equates, but in MedStar, we had a huge turnover rate, particularly first year. And what we found is that the turnover rate was to go to a better position based on their experience as a medical person, either to be a nurse or to go to the fire department or somewhere else.
Right.
And we thought, and there was no way we could figure how to do an interview to bring a new employee on and get that factored into the equation. So some of this you just have to live with and hope that you can find a way to.
Some of it you do. You don't want to prevent them from advancing, right?
Yeah.
And we have a similar situation, and I'm not going to say it's totally equatable with what you described, but we have a high number of sitters, over 100. And those folks are constantly looking for ways to advance themselves. And any opportunity within the organization or external to the organization, they're going to leave. We've got to replace them. So we got to factor that in as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult, turnover is a difficult situation in any organization. Some organizations are more stable in the employees that they bring on, but I think in this field and in places like MedStar, it's more of a turkey shoot than anything scientific you can do to keep it from being bad.
The other two metrics we'd like to continue to measure is people and provider. And we have just concluded our provider survey and our employee survey. We will have the response and the outcome of that when we come back in November, but we always want to keep our eye on those two metrics.
Do you see that, based on, because we've realized tremendous progress in both of those, especially position, over the past 3 years. Do you see not only keeping those metrics, but do you see the ability to push those metrics higher? Can you recommend this?
Possibly, depending on how that survey turns out.
Okay.
We built in a factor this year that we might have some slippage. Our vendor keeps telling us, you can't continue to push that envelope. You're gonna have some slight slippage. Do not be alarmed if you do. We kind of built that in this year, but time will tell whether or not we realize that. But we'll continue to push that envelope. Stewardship, we want to continue with the modified cost per adjusted admission for anyone below the level of VP. And we want to focus the VPs on operating margin. The leadership team has the most influence on revenues and margin, and the other individuals in the organization can do a better job of controlling cost.
Not including debt service in the overall pro forma, right?
Not including debt service, and Sharon has a very specific formula of how that will be calculated. Now, I would like to propose that academics and population health not be made a part of the annual incentive plan. I've spent some time talking with Steve Sullivan, and his point is well made. Again, back to the example of the type A personalities want their areas of responsibility highlighted, focused, everybody working on them. But in reality, there's probably no more than 2 or 3 executives on the leadership team that can actually influence or control these 2 goals. We want to put them as an organizational goal. We want to find some committee of the board to bring this information back to and realize the performance that we're achieving or not. But I would recommend that we not include them in the incentive plan.
What do you think about moving toward more value-based type thing instead?
Moving to more value-based? Oh, I think it's inevitable.
Because it's shifting, it can cover both of those.
I think this organization is, we're farther along than we were last year, much farther along than 2 years ago, but to make that as a goal for this year, I don't think that we're ready to do that.
Ready?
Not ready to make that an incentive goal.
Still not getting paid that way.
Right.
Outcomes.
But the ultimate goal is outcome. But it's very subjective at this point.
Well, and how they get reimbursed as well has a lot to do with it.
Right.
I can see where academics may not be that important to the overall incentive plan, but explain to me how population health isn't.
These particular, it is. It is, Roger. There's no question about it, and that's why it's here, because we felt strongly that it is. It affects patients, but in talking with Steve and in speaking with Dorothy, and I'm not intending to say they're the reason that I'm recommending we pull them off. There's only 2 or 3 executives that can influence population health. That's Karen Duncan, that's Joy Parker, and that's Zelia Ball.
As it's being measured here.
As it's being measured.
The concept of population health is excellent, and if they had some kind of an aggregated measure of net outcomes or something like that, that's what you're looking for.
Sure.
But they don't have that, and so they've got these very finite, and they're kind of running out of room on this card, basically, and
But is there a way to increase the criteria for population health?
raise it up
That's
to be more
more
strategic.
encompassing for everybody to where it is still a measure?
Oh, yeah. I think we do need
Because,
a
I mean, I
measure
think
for
as an
that.
incentive plan, that's a bar you want to see moved higher.
It is.
It just has to be measurable, though.
I understand that,
Because
but before we just axe it, I would rather see what we can do.
we're not asking that category, but these 2 measurements, they can come up with a different measurement. We talk about let me just do one I was thinking about on oncology. One of the deals on that is we get our patients at late stage, okay? Well, maybe we ought to be looking, could we identify them earlier? And that would bring in your primary care providers and other folks into it. And that would be, we would be looking at reducing the, identifying the cancer cases early. I know population health should be there. I just think these 2 measures are
Well,
limited.
if the metrics need to change, I'm totally fine with finding one
That's
that's
what
more
I'm
broad.
trying to say.
But as far as just taking population health off the annual incentive plan, I'm kind of against that.
Okay.
Finding a broader measure that we can indeed measure is the challenge.
What about number of connection patients with primary care physician appointment, something that tells that we're actually putting our connection patients in primary care physician care and they're actually getting it?
Yep.
Something like that, to me, is a more global sort of population health measurement.
Okay.
I don't know the extent that we can do it.
Well, it's hard to move the needle on infant mortality in a year.
Right.
Just on us, because there's so many other
Yeah,
variables
there's-
in it. But
Just as an aside, in talking with Michael, there's sort of the trend to get rid of population health as a term.
To change to
and
what?
call it outcomes. That people can understand outcome a whole lot better than population health, because there seems to be many opinions about what exactly is population health. Whereas outcome is
Yeah, it's like
relatively
mixed use in my world. It's like,
Right.
okay.
Sure.
Okay.
What's your
I
Doctor,
think-
we don't,
That's just as a
that's helpful, very helpful.
You know, I'm comfortable with the term population health because you're trying to improve the population's health. And the only way you can do that is doing some of the early screening. Your JPS connection that we put in our program, how many of those are seen by primary care within a year? I mean, we have some measurements that would affect everybody. It isn't that we don't want it on here. I just think the matrix need to be.
If we can find the right measurement, we're for it too, and we're not for dropping it.
No,
We'll
no.
try to figure that out.
Okay.
Again, the more difficult, the higher we raise that bar.
Right.
Oh, sure. Without a doubt.
I think the more providers become, as they start to get reimbursed for outcomes, then I think it'll become more measurable.
Yeah, absolutely. So
But I think there's some opportunities for us to find a more global measure.
Bill,
We
is,
can bring that back as well.
when you look at academics, for example, and trying to find quality metrics under that category, does it say something to the need to potentially go back and look at the weight of academics and their overall score?
The weight.
Yeah, because we're giving academics the same level of importance here as we give stewardship. And I'm not sure they're the same.
And that's really, that's not something that we're recommending. It's on here because it shouldn't have been.
So just take the
That's
category
still
out
in
altogether.
discussion about what those
Right.
weights should look like, depending on how many pillars we're measuring.
Uh-huh.
I'm not in a position to recommend any weights right now.
So we would then, we would redistribute that 10%.
Absolutely.
Right.
If you reduce those two pillars, you'll redistribute those weights among the four that remain. We come back with a population health global metric, we'll redistribute those weights as you see them here. And the reason we're bringing this to you before we're ready to talk about performance metrics is we want to be in a position to begin cascading some of these goals to the organization and having them work on them. Instead of waiting till November or December of every year, then you're 9 months or 90 days into the year.
Do you think it in any way potentially negatively influences our effort to become integral to the med school?
Taking away academics?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
don't
And
think
our relationship with the medical school is so strong. And I can't tell you, every day I hear, oh, you better be doing this. We're doing it. And we have more academic appointments than anybody else.
Okay.
We have more people in key leadership. And what has always been the factor from the very beginning, and not being trite or boisterous about it, that medical school will succeed with a link to its public hospital, and their leadership knows that, and they've stretched out immeasurably to Tricia Elliott. And also, your caveat of concern is good, but what Tricia Elliott has done and what Grant Fowler and our chairs have done has been pretty phenomenal. We are cemented, I would feel. And Tricia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but every time I meet with the TCU team, they're amazing about, we need you guys, and thank you for having, how many appointments do we have?
We're upwards now over 50 on almost 60.
Yeah, we're almost at 60 appointments to the medical school. So some of the folks that say we're not doing as much, or you got to protect yourself, may not know the fact, not you, I'm saying the community folks that want this high profile, we should have a building on TCU's campus. It's a little bit different than what we're actually really doing. Tricia, go ahead.
Just put your mind also additionally at ease compared to the two metrics there too, because the way we also wrote them are opportunities for collaboration. So oftentimes these education workshops and the grant submissions, we look forward to partnerships with our actual academic centers in the area.
That's good.
All right.
Yeah, don't be messing with Tricia Elliott either. She's tough.
She is polished.
She got nothing over a horn frog, let me tell you.
Okay.
Nothing over a horn frog.
Yeah, she'll take him to task.
All right. Are there any other?
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I'm leaving that alone. Is there any other questions on the goals? Okay.
On the LTIP, we're proposing that we leave those metrics as they are. That's the purpose behind a LTIP plan. It's a 3-year plan. We don't need to be changing those each and every year by validation that this committee believes the same.
All right. Do anyone have a question for Bill or for Steve? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you all.
be ready for November.
We will.
Okay. All right, I think next on the agenda is I have, okay,
It's very good training.
okay, thanks, okay. We have a couple of close item deals that I gotta get to.
Just touch the screen.
I have the mic.
Okay, we are 1/3 done with the meeting, so.
Yes, we are. We're almost done.
Wait a minute, and that was gonna be quick.
That was a quick item. Now we're gonna get into the meat of the subject. Yeah, the whole balance of the table's wrong.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. What I would like to do this afternoon is provide you all with a update on human capital relating to turnover by job class. So what you have before you this afternoon is basically turnover by job class, but at the very top, we do provide a breakdown quarterly of what the turnover is looking for within the organization. As stated, on a consistent basis, we do benchmark our information against Saratoga data. And one of the key metrics that we did focus on for this year was total voluntary turnover. As you can see, for fiscal year 18, we did end the year at 13.06. And as you can see, for each quarter, we have been trending downward with that voluntary turnover. So for quarter 3, we did close voluntary turnover at 11.81. Again, our goal is to reach the benchmark for Saratoga, which is 11.20. One other key metric to focus on too is our vacancies, and that's key because with our vacancies, we want to ensure that we are hiring right, that we're bringing the right fit to the culture. And of course, you did see a slight trend upward with our vacancies increasing for the year, and that was due to us having to hire for more sitters. And this was to make sure that we were reaching our regulatory requirements relating to patient care as well. If you look down at the very bottom of the document, of course, this provides a breakdown of our turnover by job class, and this is the data that we look at on an annualized basis. And so for the organization, again, looking at voluntary turnover, on an annualized basis, 12.27, that's where we're trending at for the quarter. As stated, this is our human capital looking at turnover, which is key to the organization. And this is just giving you an overview of how we are focusing on turnover for the year. Are there any questions relating to this document?
We have a couple of areas that, for their total turnover, and that's for is unusually high.
Well, we can talk about executives and executive turnover, and it's a challenge. We have a small, obviously it's the smallest group, and standards are high. I think what you do in an interview process is you try to vet the best you can. I do think that in those kind of high level and key positions that sometimes have 2,000 people reporting to them, in a CNO's case, or in some cases where you have over 800, where you have a plan ops division and you have an EVS division, the challenges that you have there are more glaring. So I will make hard decisions. This is a team that is, by standards of the community and standards of this board and standards of this organization, a demanding organization for reaching results. And when we either don't reach those results, that person's not going to have longevity. The other thing that I am probably different at is it is very important to me that the team not necessarily all like each other, but they all get along. And if I've got somebody that says, I can't work with so-and-so, or every time I have a meeting, it's kind of productive, those are weighty to me. And I'm going to consider that. Again, it's a thin line. I don't need everybody on that staff liking each other and all having Thanksgiving dinner together. What I do need, though, is a protocol and a process by which they can get along. So we have made changes. And I think that's the read I get from the board of the demands that you all have. I don't like the turnover rate. I don't feel comfortable with it, but I also feel comfortable with the best performing team I can possibly have. And some of those high-level positions are going to change.
Okay. Is there anything that the HR committee could help you with, or anything we could do?
Sure. I mean, I think
help
we
with that?
constantly, and Pia and I talk about this often, we constantly try to figure out about how best we keep people in the organization. We have now gone to a process by which we provide executive coaching to people who are not either getting along or trying to get along. We work on that. So I think Pia's been, and Pia, you can speak to it as well, but I think Pia's been helpful, and the HR team has been helpful at trying to do everything we can to keep somebody on the executive team.
All right.
I'd like to see how much of the involuntary turnover are people that have been here less than 5 years.
Throughout all categories?
Well, no, executives specifically, the one we're talking about right now.
Less than 5 years?
Yeah, right, and maybe 3 years is better. You guys tell me, but I'd like, because it would be one thing to me if I saw that high rate of turnover were people that have been here 10 years or more.
Right.
Than people that have been here 2 years.
Right.
Because a lot of that's just, we learned that they don't fit. As opposed to somebody who's been here loyal and done a great job for a long, long time, a whole bunch of those start leaving. To me, that's a different,
I agree.
a different issue.
Well, and anecdotally, I can tell you that the greater percentage of turnover is going to be in your 3-year category.
Okay.
They're not going to be your long-term.
That's what I'm
We'll get the stats on that, but just to my memory and knowledge, they're going to be people that did not work in the organization. Just the interview process was different than the reality. Okay. Or what we have found is we find executives, and we even find vendors that do this, will constantly underestimate JPS and its challenges. And they will get in and say, oh, I can do that, I can do that. And then they find when they're here the harsh realities of a challenging and complicated place.
It kind of goes back to what Amanda was saying, though. You know, do we have the right criteria in terms of our search
Yes.
characteristics? And if we don't have the right criteria that we apply to our professional search firms, we shouldn't be too shocked that
we're getting that. I agree. I agree.
Okay.
We'll have that to you.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions on it? Comments? Okay, all right. I think that's all I have for opens.
We have a policy.
Oh, a policy, I'm sorry.
Personal leave.
Didn't flip back to my, okay, so what's your policy?
HR 3200 personal leave.
Oh, okay,
And there are not any changes to the policy.
okay, so, okay.
Why is it on the agenda?
Huh?
Why is it on the
It
agenda?
has to go through the process of being approved. When it expires, it has to be approved.
This
but
one
there are no
expires.
changes.
Okay.
Okay, all right. It's a motion by Dr. P, second by Roger. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All right, pass. So we do not have anything else, but we do have a couple of close item. In closed session items, okay?
You mean we're 2/3 done?
Okay. We will reconvene in open session at, I think that's 1:10. there being no
agenda
further
item
business.
attached to it.
Suppose I would state that we never
You know,
officially
we
went
need
into
to
closed
go.
session instead of saying.
Okay, all right, okay. There is no further business, so therefore we are closed.
Thank you.